Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the April 22nd, 2023 County Board meeting. I am Board Chair Christian Dorsey. I'll be presiding today, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Vice Chair Garvey, board members Mr. DeFerranti and Ms. Crystal, and joining us remotely from Montreal, Canada is Mr. Carantonis, who is traveling for personal reasons. Thanks to those of you who are joining us in the boardroom this morning, and we also have a number of people participating today remotely via Microsoft Teams. A few announcements before we get started. Masks are optional, and if you would like one, you can see our clerk up at the front, Ms. Jacobs, who will be happy to assist you. And as you'll see, the board members are practicing safe distancing and may wear masks based on our individual preferences. We will have members of the public and county staff who are participating remotely as part of our hybrid meeting model. For those of you who are intending to speak at today's meeting, for our in-person speakers, you can come up when your name is called to the lectern. It can adjust based on your preferences using the up and down arrows to the right. Microphone is always on, so you don't have to press anything to activate it. If you have documents that you'd like to submit for the board as part of your testimony, please hand those to the clerk and ensure that your name and contact information is included on all documents. For our remote speakers, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off until you are asked to speak. You will then need to unmute yourself if you're joining by phone by pressing *6. And if you are using Microsoft Teams, use the microphone button that's located on the toolbar. Occasionally, if board members are not here at the front, it doesn't mean that we have left the meeting. We can follow the proceedings from the dais, even if you can, from behind us on the dais, even if you cannot see us. With that, we are ready to move into our public comment period. As a reminder, public comment is for individuals to alert the board to issues that have not been the subject of a recent public hearing, nor are scheduled for an upcoming public hearing. To ensure that we have the opportunity to hear a range of topics, we do have a one speaker per topic rule. This helps us efficiently manage the main purpose of today's meeting, which is to consider the items that are on our regular agenda. So we appreciate everyone's help and cooperation in having our meetings run efficiently. And if you are, I don't think this is going to be the case today, but if there are people who are here who are in support of your message, who do not otherwise have an opportunity to speak based on that rule, you can feel free to identify them and let us know that they are associated with your remarks. And if you are looking for other ways to engage the county board, there are a myriad ways to do that. You can write us at countyboard@arlingtonva.us, or if you desire a more dynamic and deeper conversation with board members, on most Mondays, we host what's called Open Door Mondays, where you can join us virtually to discuss any items that are on your mind. If you'd like more information about that, you can see it on our website on ways to engage the county board, or you can see any of our clerks and staff that are here today who will be happy to assist you. With that, Ms. Jacobs, I think we're ready for our public comment speakers.
Our first speaker is Ulysses Terry, followed by Alexander Sirocco.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the County Board, my name is Ulysses Terry. I appeared before you last month to request the County Board use its authority to address the continual parking and traffic problems on South Nelson Street. I was told at the last County Board that you would be following up with me, yet no one from the county has contacted me. Yeah, I have some video pictures with this. And as you can see with these pictures, the problem still exists. These pictures are from the last meeting up until Tuesday. The Green Valley Civic Association has worked with me and the neighbors, the mosque, and the Arlington County Police Department to resolve the situation, but there still has to be a lot to be accomplished. At this point, we need the county to step up and use its authority to address a significant problem. It's not right for people to leave their cars double parked in the street, block the driveways of homeowners, park in our driveways, and sometimes leave cars running in the middle of the street in order to attend a prayer at the service mosque. What do I have to do to get the county to respond? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. We'll respond to your remarks after we hear from all the public comment speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alexander Sirocco, followed by Logan Kroll.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I spent over 12 years on the CSB DD committee. Prior to that, I've spent years on the Special Education Committee, even chair of the Special Education Committee. Hi, Libby. And what I'm asking is not for a policy exception, but for an adherence to the policy that the CSB made on a mode of care transportation effort. The way it works, if you have an MR waiver, your child used to be transported on Diamond, but the money can be paid for by the state if you use a state vehicle. What's happened is Arlington has saved over $700,000 by going to the motor care process. I think that's wonderful. I was on the CSB DD committee. It's a great savings. You can use it for other programs. But the important part was the policy statement that hopefully you all saw, that the CSB said, do this, save the money, but if there are individual needs that can be addressed in another matter, address those. Now, DHS has done that for other parents. What I'm asking for is that we adhere to the policy in the case of my daughter, who goes on the Diamond Disability Van. She's gone to the Arlington Weaves, wonderful program, one of the few in the country that you have. Thank you. Please keep it.
You have 30 seconds.
But this adherence to let her go on a Diamond van will not cost you any money. The van goes past my street. 4 of her workers on the van. She's been on the van for 13 years. She doesn't understand why she's been kicked off the van. Right now, MotorCare has different drivers, different people, no shows every single day. I've had meltdowns in the middle of the street to her bolting the house. So
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Sirocco.
just, this has no
Thank you.
budget impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Logan Kroll, followed by Mary Glass.
Hello.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I'm representing a charity called Wheels to Africa. We collect bikes here in Arlington, and we send them to Africa along with other things, such as board games and pens and things for the children in Africa. The bikes are helpful to them as it helps them gain transportation, and it gives them access to things that they may not have been able to do before. We are hosting a bike collection here in Arlington next Saturday in the Kenmore parking lot, 10 a.m. to 2 a.m., 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. I would just ask that you would spread the word of this, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to use the space in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll.
Our next speaker is Mary Glass.
Do you have my slides?
I do. If you could go ahead and start speaking, and I'll catch up to you.
Yes. Private citizens concerned about the loss of trees in public and private lands had commissioned a new tree canopy land cover assessment using their own funds. It showed that the tree canopy is 33%, not the 41% currently used by the county. The difference is this study used better data and techniques and avoided the previous overcounting of shrubs as trees. The detailed information provided should be used to inform the Developing Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, policy decisions, and other county actions. A small fraction of the $400,000 currently committed to outside consultants to write the plan, this study offers at a much lower cost the focus on many important aspects of forestry planning. Next slide, please. This slide shows that the information on existing canopy and potential planting areas by neighborhood can be provided down to the block level, showing significant differences between neighborhoods and exact locations for plantings. Next slide. The best areas to plant street trees, areas where we can mitigate heat islands, and watersheds where low tree canopy is increasing flooding, have all been identified, along with many other characteristics that are useful for forestry planning. Based on this study, the maximum tree canopy possible in Arlington was 39%, the same as the 2011 study showed, and almost half of that is on public land. The county can take the lead with projects that deliver public services that come from trees. Next slide. County leadership needs to make trees and natural resources a much higher priority, require specific objectives and actions in the forestry plan, and aggressively enforce the codes that we now have. The trees are not simply decoration. They provide important public services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Glass.
And Ms. Glass, I apologize. I was having trouble pulling up your slides, but we will make sure the board gets them.
Thank you.
And thank you. Are there any other public speakers? Well, thanks to all of you for joining us today. Briefly, Mr. Terry, we do understand that the issue is ongoing, and I apologize that if we dropped the ball on following up specifically, but we are actually well aware of the circumstances and the concerns. I'd just like to ask Mr. Schwartz, we struggle with, adequate support in terms of staffing in the police department, but we have added support in positions to monitor issues like what Mr. Terry has described. Has there been any pivoting to focusing on some of those hotspot times that we know come from the mosque?
Yes, what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask Ben Aiken to fill you in on that because he has an update. Ben?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Yeah, and we are, as Mr. Dorsey, you correctly mentioned, well aware, and on the staff side as well, about the situation with the mosque. As recently as yesterday, Deputy Chief Wayne Vincent, who oversees ACPD's Community Engagement Division, spoke at the Bangladesh Islamic Center's celebration. And during the ceremony, the president, and I apologize in advance for mispronouncing if I do his last name, but Mr. Mohammed Qayyam, told his worshipers that the mosque is working and should hopefully soon receive permitting to begin construction on their parking lot. And that is the long-term solution that we are looking for. We, meaning the county manager's office, stand ready to facilitate with regard to any permits that they do need to begin the construction and to expedite those if at all possible. And you asked, I believe you were asking about enforcement. While we await the parking lot, ACPD parking aides have written tickets and do write tickets for instances, as Mr. Terry described, double parking, parking in front of driveways, in violation of county code and ordinance. ACPD do and can write tickets. We would encourage Mr. Terry and others to continue calling, as I know they do, the non-emergency line as soon as they see these issues crop up. We have also taken additional steps within the special enforcement section to engage with the mosque and make sure that they understand and are communicating to their community that these are traffic safety issues. We are aware that the mosque, the Bangladeshi Islamic Center, has hired uniformed security to actually monitor during high usage situations. And they are, we believe, fully committed in good faith to eliminating this what we know is a burden on the community. So we are working with them, and I apologize for having not perhaps myself followed up with Mr. Terry, and we'd be happy to do that after this meeting. So thank you.
Mr. Aiken, thank you very much for that update. And hopefully, Mr. Terry, you can see that we're working on multiple levels to try and deal with this. The most important and encouraging of this is the permanent parking solution that the BIC is pursuing, something that I will note is coming at certainly great expense to them. So hopefully you view them as a partner in trying to make sure this doesn't continue to create difficult circumstances within the community. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question, I guess maybe for the manager, maybe for Mr. Aiken. I'm convinced, I think in the long run that we're really working on it. We should get to a much better place. But at the moment, say you're in your house and the car is blocked and you got to leave real quickly. Maybe you need to take somebody to the hospital or something. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to call yourself an Uber or a cab to get out? I mean, I'm just wondering what is a resident supposed to do if it's actually an emergency and they can't leave their house with their own car?
Yeah, I would say in that situation, calling the police, not the non-emergency number, but the actual 911. But I know that that's happened in the past. I don't have a clever solution other than to say that you're probably going to have to rely on alternative means.
Yeah.
So we can't be everywhere at once, but we will do our best.
I totally understand. Thank you. I think, hopefully we'll fix it because these can have really dire consequences for people, which I think we do all understand. And I'm sure it's frustrating for Mr. Terry to have to keep coming back, and it just takes a while to get to the right solution. But thank you for your tolerance, and hopefully it's a real emergency. People will find other ways to get where they need to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Terry, I mentioned it actually to this issue. The first thing I said when I saw President Khayyam, and I don't know that I have his pronunciation of his last name perfect. He's kind about my pronunciation, but I did mention it yesterday to him. And I think it's wise. I don't have to be this person, but I think really appreciate Mr. Aiken's follow-up. And I think that my perception when I've been a couple of times to the BIC the last year is that it's been better than 2 and 3 years ago, but that does not mean sufficiently, as the example that Ms. Garvey mentioned. So at least I'd suggest, I really appreciate Mr. Aiken's leadership, but perhaps one board member might join that just to help as we see things through over the coming weeks and months. And it does not have to be me, and I'm also not trying to take the space of Mr. Aiken, but it might be helpful if one of us kind of followed up to follow through. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah, I hear you volunteering. Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, thank you. Mr. Terry, I apologize for not having followed up with you personally, but I went after your testimony on March, and knowing that the month of Ramadan was beginning, I went and I met with President Khayyam already at the very beginning of the month of Ramadan, and he committed back then to have at least 4 for each Friday prayer round, which is the most visited one, to have at least 4 paid people who would manage the parking on top of the volunteers from the Majid there. Obviously, this was not enough. It's the first month of Ramadan after COVID, so they were themselves overwhelmed. We talked at some point after 1 week into the month to find a way to have some shuttle or to have a place where people could park and then be shuttled to the Masjid for the Friday prayers. This was logistically not possible at this point, but I do believe that you are absolutely right. This is an ongoing problem on specific festivities, and especially during the month of Ramadan. It will be very difficult to manage, and so we must look into extending our planning for that also as if it were a special event every Friday prayers. And this year, on top of everything else, the Eid Mubarak to everybody who's celebrating yesterday and today. Eid fell on a Friday, so that doubles down on the density of demand for the services of the Masjid. So we hear you.
So, Mr. Karantonis, your connection
We need to
broke
find a
up on
way
us.
that, yeah. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, but I believe that I conveyed what I wanted to say. This needs a bigger solution to find a place where cars can be parked and shuttled to the Masjid during festivities with high attendance, especially like during one of Ramadan that we just completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, Mr. Sirocco, thank you for coming, and understand that you have surfaced these concerns with the manager as well as the DHS director, which I would encourage, because while certainly you make a logical and thoughtful case here, the actual decisions on the logistics of how we're going to deal with individualized circumstances best resides with those folks, instead of having the board convene to consider what are the possible operational choices. I don't know, Mr. Manager, if you have any comment at this time, other than that?
No, I would only say that, both Alex and Susan, who I know very well, and have been very thoughtful in their concerns, I have talked with Anita Friedman and the folks over at the Department of Human Services, and they have taken within their discretion the decision about the criteria, about what they think is appropriate, and they've had the Developmental Disability Support Coordinator working with the Sirocco's daughter, and beyond that, I don't really have anything else to comment on.
So, Mr. Sirocco, we can't really engage in that kind of dynamic conversation this morning. We do have our Open Door Mondays for that purpose, so we're not going to be able to do that today. We can't. I'm sorry. But please, I hope you understand fundamentally that the board of 5 people getting involved in making these individual policy decisions would create very much inequities throughout all of the clients that are served, creating the desire for them to appeal of getting an unfavorable decision to the board, and an expectation that there would be consistency in how criteria were applied for everyone. So we do want to encourage you to work and continue to present your case. If you do desire to discuss this more dynamically with the board, do encourage you to participate in our Open Door Monday sessions. Mr. Kroll, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry.
Follow-up question.
Sure, Ms. Crystal, I apologize.
No, I think, Mr. Chair, that's really well put. It would help me, Mr. Manager, if I could get in follow-up, if you could just share with us what the criteria are that are being applied to determine where exceptions are made to the waiver-funded service as per the recommended policy. If that is in fact the policy, that if we have adopted it, what the CSB recommended, as Mr. Sirocco noted, is ensure that clients have access to transportation appropriate to their needs in cases where mode of care is insufficient to guarantee that access. If I could just have some sense of how that determination is being made, I think that would help, as Mr. Dorsey noted, in future circumstances, as with Anna Sirocco. Thank you for coming in.
And so, Ms. Garvey,
Yeah,
yes.
no, just quick, because I think we all know the Siroccos, and appreciate you coming, but I think our chair laid out pretty quickly what the appropriate lanes are for all of us to be in. But again, I would add, if you'd like to come to Open Door Monday, or have a meeting with any of us, we do meet with people, and don't want to get out of where we are. But I would also appreciate, I'm sure we all would, when Mr. Manager, you respond to Ms. Crystal, that we all kind of get that information. So thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Mr. Kroll, thank you for bringing us I'm glad to see it. I'm not sure that it happened last year, the Donate a Bike event from Wheels to Africa. This is really one of the just wonderful Arlington stories of initiative and activism, and to see that it's been sustained for so many years is terrific. The origins of this organization, founded by an 11-year-old to really take some of the bounty and the resources that are generated in art communities that no longer have a desired life, and to make sure that they are given to individuals who would value them and who can get life out of them. So even though we typically do not embrace the idea of having this forum used as a way of advertising events, I think this is one where hopefully everyone can agree it's a good exception. So April 29th, 2023, if you have a bike that is no longer used and there are other supplies that they collect as well, you can take those to Washington Liberty between 10 and 2. And finally, Ms. Glass, thank you for coming. And we have followed the news of the community-funded tree canopy study, which I know our staff is digging into and we're looking at. Again, I will say, as I've said repeatedly, there is no daylight in terms of desired outcomes to have a healthy and growing tree canopy in Arlington. We take advantage of that, as you noted. with an aggressive policy in our public spaces. We're continuing to refine that by making sure that not only do we plant sufficiently, but that they're maintained appropriately and are devoting the necessary budgetary resources to do that. In private property and private opportunities where we do have leverage, such as with site plan reviews, we also have an aggressive tree planting program and are growing in our ability to monitor and enforce conditions that ensure that they become healthy and thrive. We do have a lot of private property that is not subject to those aggressive planting and maintenance requirements that we can enact in those other circumstances. And we continue to seek both creative ways as well as legislative fixes to ensure that we can have as healthy and robust a tree canopy as we can. I know there's a lot to say about this issue. I'll leave it at that. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, just simply thank Ms. Glass for coming in and let you know the slides did come through. I've already looked at them, so we do have them. And thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you very much. One area that I've had conversations and want to work with staff on eventually is Department of Parks and Recreation is working on tree equity related work. And I think it's appropriate for staff to lead that. But in light of the slides that talk about disparate tree canopy cover, that's something that I'm particularly interested in continuing to work with the manager and staff on. Thanks.
Thank you. And with that, we have concluded our public comment. Thank you to all of our speakers for bringing your issues and concern to us. We do look forward to following up as we can where appropriate. And for everyone else, we will get started with our regular meeting in just a couple of minutes after we take a brief break. We'll be back here at 9 o'clock. Thank you.
May I approach? May I approach?
Thank you all. So we are now ready to move on to our consent agenda. Ms. Jacobs, have any items been pulled from said agenda?
Yes, we have one item that has been pulled, item number 1, which is SP 105U211, use permit review for an open air market has been pulled.
Oh, great. Because of the timing of this will be an item that is pulled and then ultimately rescinded. But procedurally, it has to be pulled. Understood. All right. So at this point, colleagues, I would welcome a motion on the consent agenda items. So moved by Mr. DeFerranti. Is there a second from Ms. Crystal? All right, thank you very much. We'll now move to a vote on the consent agenda minus item number 1. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. 5-0. So the item that was removed from today's consent agenda will be considered at our recess meeting on Tuesday, the 25th, no earlier than 6:30 p.m. If anyone would like to speak on that item, which I don't expect they will, please visit the County Board's website at countyboard.arlingtonva.us or call our office at 703-228-3130 to sign up in advance. You may also sign up at the point of the meeting. Now, as we look at our consent agenda, the board just took action on dozens of items, and those include minor site plan amendments, use permit requests, ordinance amendments, request to advertise, and more. These items were put on our consent agenda because they are generally thought to be non-controversial, but that doesn't mean that they are unimportant. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to highlight several items in particular. First, items 3 and 4 are child care use permits, where the board approved 2 use permits. One is for an after-school program for venerable organization Aspire that will be operated out of the Gillingham Place property operated by APA on Columbia Pike, and it will serve at-risk students in grades 3 through 5. The Children's Weekday Program is a new child care center within the Church of the Covenant that will serve up to 71 children from infancy at 3 months through 6 years. And as I mentioned, Aspire is in the Alcova Heights neighborhood on Columbia Pike, and the Children's Weekday Program at the Church of the Covenant is in the Donaldson Run neighborhood. Next, item 13 are amendments to the Arlington zoning ordinance regarding indoor entertainment uses. In continuation of our commercial market resiliency strategy, the board has approved several amendments to the zoning ordinance to update our defined indoor recreation use tables and streamline our commercial indoor recreation use process. These changes directly respond to the demand for indoor recreation in walkable locations. Indeed, activities such as escape rooms, climbing gyms, and even virtual or augmented reality gaming have increased in popularity. And these amendments will help us respond to these trends and create more vibrant and innovative spaces in Arlington. Items 23 and 24, some grant funding where the board has authorized the county manager to accept federal and state funding for Arlington County. A little over $118,000 received from the Virginia Department of Transportation's Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Grant, which will bolster our efforts to facilitate and market alternative commute options such as transit, biking, and shared rides. We received $25,000 in additional funding from the Virginia Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services that will add a part-time position to assist the Department of Human Services in its outreach and support operations in preparation for the Medicaid open enrollment period. Items 25 and 26 are 2 property acquisitions as part of our stormwater resiliency program. So properties located at 4423 and 4433 18th Street North, and they will be demolished and used to make watershed improvements in this area of the county. This, of course, may sound a little bit unconventional, but as flooding and flooding risk get more severe in our region, the county must innovate its mitigation strategies to address impacted residential areas. We launched this voluntary acquisition program in 2022 and have identified specific properties in the Spout Run watershed that could be repurposed to manage extreme flooding. Items 28 through 30 are requests to advertise public hearings on 2 proposed amendments to the Arlington County zoning ordinance and changes to the Arlington County Code. Item 28, which will be heard no earlier than June 10th, would allow additional food delivery establishments such as ghost kitchens, which create food for off-premises consumption. This item would also clarify existing zoning ordinance standards that address shared commercial kitchens, food catering services, and food delivery by restaurants or similar food-related uses within a range of mixed-use commercial and industrial zoning districts. Item 29, which will be heard on May 1st by the Planning Commission and then the board at its May meeting, if approved, would correct minor technical errors and inconsistencies throughout the zoning ordinance. These are part of regular and routine upkeep where we review the zoning ordinance to make sure it is technically up to date and clear. And item 30, which will be heard publicly on May 13th, it would authorize an increase in the taxi cab drop charges from $3 to $3.50 and the cost of the charge for a sixth of a mile of travel from 36 cents to 40 cents, and would also increase the wait time from 36 to 40 cents, 36 cents to 40 cents as well. These changes have been recommended to recalibrate fares and associated revenues to counterbalance today's operating costs. I do not remember specifically, but it has been quite a while since taxi fares have been adjusted. And in order to ensure robust alternatives to rideshare, and more specifically to make sure that we have vehicle for hires available for people with mobility challenges, this is something that stakeholders have universally viewed as being necessary. So those are the highlights. And with that, we are now ready to go ahead and move into our regular hearing. Ms. Jacobs, are you ready to call the first one?
Yes, item number 33, actually 33A through C. Site plan number 466 for the Americana Hotel redevelopment at 1460 Richmond Highway. It includes a rezoning proposal as well as a site plan to construct residential units with retail and a site plan to modify required parking and permit off-site parking.
Thank you. And we'd now like to turn it over to Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joining us today in person is Kevin Lamb. I think Joanne Gabor is also available for questions, so I'm going to turn it over to you for the presentation, Mr. Lamb.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. I'm Kevin Lamb with the Planning Division, and I'm the lead planner for the Americana Hotel redevelopment project. So this item consists of 3 parts. As previously mentioned, the first is a rezoning request. We also have a new site plan amendment. And then we also have an associated, or new site plan, and we have an associated site plan amendment for the Bartlett Apartments to modify their required parking, as well as permit off-site parking for the Americana site plan.
Mr. Lamb, before you continue, if you would just bring your microphone maybe about 4 inches closer, I think that'll be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So the site is located at 1460 Richmond Highway in the Crystal City neighborhood, located between Eade Street and Richmond Highway. It is currently occupied by the former Americana Hotel building and surface parking lot, as you can see in this aerial image. And as shown in the second image, you can see the hotel building fronts the existing elevated portion of Richmond Highway. So the GLUB designation for the site is High Office Apartment Hotel, and it is also located in the Crystal City Coordinated Redevelopment District. And as previously mentioned, the applicant is requesting a rezoning from RAH 3.2 to CO Crystal City. So the new site plan, it consists of a 19-story residential tower built at a LEED Gold certification. It will include 639 units in almost 3,900 square feet of ground floor retail for a total density of 8.64 FAR. Parking will be located on-site in an underground parking garage as well as off-site at the existing Bartlett Apartments for a residential parking ratio of 0.6 spaces per unit. And the applicant is requesting the following zoning ordinance modifications listed here. So in terms of policy guidance, the site is subject to the Crystal City's sector plan and located in the Northwest Gateway District. However, this particular site is not identified for potential redevelopment, and therefore site-specific improvements for future public space or transportation improvements were not initially envisioned as part of the conceptual plan. Also, since the site is located west of Richmond Highway, it is not required to include a block plan. So, as a result, in the absence of both a block plan as well as site-specific improvements, the site does present itself as a redevelopment opportunity in Crystal City and subject to other sector plan guidance to ensure it supports the plan's goals and objectives. So while staff identified 2 design guideline deviations, we have analyzed these and found them to be in general conformance with the intent of the sector plan. So one deviation I wanted to talk about is the minimum podium frontage requirement. So as proposed on Eid Street, the facade includes a 50-foot recessed area that leads to the building's main entrance, which is a deviation from the design guidelines. So to align with the spirit of the sector plan guidance in creating both a continuous and activated street edge, staff did coordinate with the applicant on certain design revisions to improve its relationship with the street. So the applicant did end up incorporating, wood bench seating with integrated planters that wraps around the retail patio and also creates movement into this space. And then other changes include soft lighting in the soffit, in the tabletop columns, and the benches, as well as various biophilic design elements. So overall, these changes do help create a more welcoming entry area and better relate to this space's various functions, which include kind of the residential waiting area. We have the retail patio, as well as access to the pedestrian pathway. So both street frontages are being designed in coordination with 2 ongoing transportation projects. The first is the county's South Eid Street Complete Street Project, and then we also have the VDOT's Route 1 Multimodal Improvement Study, which plans to bring this elevated segment of Richmond Highway to an at-grade boulevard. So as you can see in these images here, the project's Richmond Highway frontage has been designed to accommodate both the existing conditions as well as the anticipated VDOT streetscape improvements. So in terms of parking, the Americana Hotel site plan consists of 384 residential parking spaces for a parking ratio of 0.6 spaces per unit. Parking is proposed to be located both on-site and off-site in the existing Bartlett Apartments garage. So this off-site parking arrangement is facilitated by a site plan amendment for the Bartlett Apartments. So this involves a reduced parking ratio from 0.79 to 0.7 spaces per unit, and then also being able to permit 206 spaces for the Americana Hotel site plan. So both the reduced residential parking ratio as well as the off-site parking arrangement is supported by the residential parking guidelines adopted by the county. So the applicant will provide the following commitments to achieve 3.85 FAR in additional density. So this includes contributions to AHIF as well as for off-site transportation and public space improvements in Crystal City. The applicant will also be granting a future public access easement for that pedestrian pathway. And then also they will be achieving a LEED Gold certification and also meeting the county's green building incentive policy criteria at the 0.25 FAR level. So the review process for this project began last June with an LRPC meeting, followed by an online engagement in October, and then 2 SPRC meetings, and then finally this month, various commission meetings. So overall, the site plan is consistent with the GLUP, the zoning ordinance, and sector plan guidance, and also advances several key county goals and policies. So first, the project will provide the base affordable housing contribution, as well as an additional AHIF contribution, which could be leveraged at the nearby Crystal houses and help in the creation of approximately 93 committed affordable units for a period of 99 years. The project will provide contributions for off-site transportation improvements in Crystal City, such as the South East Street Complete Street project, as well as the 18th Street realignment project, both of which will create a safer and more accessible environment for all street users. The applicant will provide contributions toward planning and implementation of public space in Crystal City, such as the planned Metro Market Square, as well as Center Park, which will be accessed by the public. The applicant will also provide a future public access easement following completion of the Richmond Highway improvements, which will provide a mid-block pedestrian connection. The project will be built at a LEED Gold certification level and meet the Green Building Incentive Program criteria, including providing Energy Star appliances and fixtures, electric vehicle charging, as well as bird-friendly facade material. And then lastly, the project is in general conformance with the sector plan design guidelines in terms of building massing and site design. So therefore, staff recommend adoption of the attached ordinances listed here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. We appreciate it. We're now ready to hear a presentation from the applicant. And I see you've got a team there. Maybe I'll recognize Mr. Whitmore to introduce the applicant team.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We're going to have a presentation from Jack Kelly with JBG Smith.
Can you guys hear me okay? Great, let me just make sure this works. Perfect. Good morning, everyone, members of the board. Again, my name is Jack Kelly. I'm a vice president at JBG Smith, and I'll be sharing a brief overview of the Americana site project. Before I get going, just a quick reminder for those watching at home, this presentation and recording will be available on the county's website. Here's just a quick overview of how we've organized our presentation today. Much of the content here will reiterate what we just heard from staff, so I'll try not to dwell on anything too redundant. But big picture, we're really excited about this project and are thankful for all of the hard work by Arlington County staff, our project team, and the local stakeholders that have participated in the process. We think it's clear that the collective input that we've received along the way has improved the proposed project substantially, and we're looking forward to keeping up the momentum. Okay, just going to start here with a brief project overview. I think I'll hit this relatively quickly. This site is right across from Met Park. Go back here, sorry. Bound by Southeast to the west and Route 1 to the east. As you can see here, it's a relatively long and narrow site. Jumping to some pictures of the existing conditions out on South East Street. Just please note these are a bit dated. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to walk around Met Park, I encourage you to do so. It looks great, but we included these just for some additional context. The aerial plan here reflects the current project. We have approximately 527 residential square feet and just under 4,000 square feet of retail. The program includes 639 residential units and 188 on-site residential and visitor parking spaces. We'll talk about our off-site parking strategy here in a minute. Now we're going to move on to a little more information about the site design. So to start this, we worked with our architect to ensure that the building's massing responded to the dimensions of the site, which again are long and narrow, while respecting the Crystal City Sector Plan's guidance on setbacks to existing buildings. We also wanted to ensure that we could use the massing to create visual interest given the scale of this building. And you can see in this diagram here where we started to push and pull on the articulation of the facade plan to achieve what we think is an attractive balance and distinctive areas within the massing. Should switch here in a second. Just an overview of the ground floor plan here. We've included a legend at the top that's color coded. I'll just point out a few highlights here. We do have retail along Eads, as mentioned, directly across from the Met Park retail. We think this is a great spot in the streetscape along Eads here to help add some activation to the east side of Eads. We have residential units at the ground floor level. Those are noted here in blue. We've also concentrated our loading and parking entry to the south in gray, which is served off the existing curb cut to the existing hotel. Finally, we have our amenity space on the eastern portion of the building. This was actually a pretty large topic of discussion during the process. We got some good feedback from the community and the SPRC process where we are really working to make sure that that portion of the building both responds to the existing condition from a design and program perspective, but also works in the future condition if and when Route 1 comes down to grade. And so we've moved what was originally residential units from that portion of the building and swap that out for the amenity, which primarily is the gym, to add some activation to the glass line along the building frontage there. And we'll look at some images of that here in a second. Just going to breeze through some additional imagery here. This is a rendering that's looking south down South Eads Street. It features actually a pretty good view of the balconies. This building has around 40% of the units have balconies, which we like to do in most of our projects. Those balconies use a metal rail that was actually inspired by the design of the previous Americana hotel site as you drive into Crystal City and Richmond Highway. Additionally, the current design includes some feedback we received through the community engagement process where we've added an additional pedestrian pathway. It's not too visible in this image. We'll get there in a second. And we've also included additional tower setbacks along Eads Street here at 5 and 8 feet, respectively, at the north and the south. We think that really helps define the podium expression. Moving on here to a view of the residential entry here. This is a really good view of that pedestrian pathway to the page left that leads you from South Eads Street all the way over to the Route 1 road there. You can also see well here the tabletop element, which was a topic of much discussion during the process. We think it ended up great. It's a signature feature of the design here. And as Kevin mentioned, we've incorporated additional biophilic elements with a wood bench and some additional planting along the streetscape here to further activate the residential entry. There's also some retail seating just beyond that bench. I'll show you a view of that here in a second. This is looking back out the other way towards Eads. And again, a couple things to highlight here with that frame coming down to page right. That tabletop feature is clad material, precast, and has about 1.5 feet of space in between each of those fins that you can see there. The intent there is to provide additional light and air throughout that space as people from both the general public and people coming to the building walk through this area. You can see here also there is some additional outdoor dining for that retail space to the page left. Really the intent here was to create this condition as something of an outdoor room, and so we've tried to make sure that both from an accessibility standpoint and a design standpoint, this space feels really nice. You can also note some of the additional wood soffit material at the top there. That was something we did during the community engagement process as well. And this also highlights those fins, which we think is a really great opportunity to add some additional lighting that could be quite distinctive as well at night. We have an image of that further in the presentation. So this building really doesn't have a backside. We think, for the most part, all facades are visible, so we've used high-quality materials and detail throughout. This is a rendering from Route 1, which represents the future condition, and we think showcases well the contrasting vertical and horizontal precast expressions that we think actually pay nice homage to some of the mid-century modern architecture from the original Americana Hotel. This image also reflects the terminus of the east-west connection that will get pedestrians from South Eads all the way over to Route 1. And then again, you can see the glass line here where we've included the amenity space to help activate that portion of the building along the future condition with the sidewalk there. And then one of the other things we worked through during the community engagement process was making sure that the design of the podium and the setbacks above with the tower added a nice kind of grounding to the design on both Eads and Route 1. And I'll flip quickly to this. This is actually the existing condition with the ramp that goes down to 15th Street from Richmond Highway. Now I'm just going to go into a brief overview of the landscaping that we've incorporated into the project. So here's a view of that. This landscape plan includes multiple levels of biophilic elements across the project. At the ground level, we're using integrated seating and landscaping to help activate South Eads, as mentioned as well along the residential entry, and the pedestrian connection to the north, leading into the private space at the northeast corner of the building. For residents of the project, we've also included an outdoor deck that's surrounded by canopy trees that's connected to the fitness center. We have a second floor planted terrace to connect to the co-working space on South Eads above the retail. And then we have 2 terraces on the roof, both to the west and the east side of the building to provide an open air amenity and green space that contributes to the project's tree canopy coverage. And there are some great views down the highway corridor there downtown as well. Here's another view of the podium on South Eads Street. Again, throughout the SPRC process, we did work with staff and the community to figure out where to add biophilic elements where practical. And so you can see some of those reflected here in this image. Above the retail glass line at the podium, you'll see the additional green planter row. And then you can kind of see that residential entry bench and associated landscaping as well. So we think this is an inviting condition. Flipping to just a night view here where you can see better some of those opportunities to really accentuate the tabletop feature there and the retail. One thing to note as well from this angle is that tabletop does provide a practical function as well in screening some of the loading and entering into the parking from the south. Just going to move to a quick overview here on sustainability. This project is seeking LEED Gold certification, and through the entitlement process has refined the design to meet the criteria of the GBI program, which includes a design performing at least 20% better by energy performance over a baseline building. It also incorporates 5% level 2 EV charging stations day 1 while being 15% EV ready for future demand. We also have bird-friendly glass that we've incorporated into the design at the greatest in the areas with the greatest collision threats. And as part of our commitment to sustainability for our entire company, we've actually achieved carbon neutrality across our entire 16.8 million square foot operating portfolio, and therefore for this project intend to invest in off-site renewables in perpetuity. Here's just a quick snapshot of our latest energy study, which includes a better building envelope, LED lighting, high efficiency water source heat pumps, Energy Star appliances, and WaterSense labeled fixtures that we think make a significant impact on the project's sustainability objectives. Moving into just a few highlights from Transportation Commission from the end of March. Just a quick overview here. This project is very well located with excellent access to public transportation. We have 2 metro stations in less than a 10-minute walk from the site. We also have 10 bus routes within a quarter mile as well. And then the protected bike lane out front, which you'll get a look at here in a second. So as mentioned, this project is currently designed to have a 0.6 per unit parking ratio with half of those spaces below grade and on site and the other half located down the street at the Bartlett. The image on the right reflects what that walk could look like. It's about 3 minutes from the site. Moving to a rendering of the streetscape here, this reflects the county's planned 12th to 15th Street Complete Street Improvement Project along South Eads. That includes a 7-foot wide pickup and drop-off zone on page right there, separated by a concrete island. And then you get into the protected bike lane, the tree pit area, and then 10-foot clear sidewalk as you lead up to the leading edge of the building. We've got an additional image here that reflects kind of a top-down view of the curb cut condition that we've concentrated into one curb cut off of South Eads. And you can see better the way that the streetscape is organized as part of that county project. I believe it's called CC23, the Complete Street Project. And then quickly to wrap up here on community benefits, I believe Kevin highlighted most of these, but significant contributions to both open space and the Crystal City Coordinated Development District, along with a contribution to DES to help fund some of those off-site improvements I just mentioned along South Eads. We've also got the public access pedestrian path through the site as well, and then significant contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund, just over $9 million to help support those units at Crystal Houses. And then again, LEED Gold, and we are participating in the DBI program. That wraps us up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We appreciate it greatly. Know that we've had a number of our advisory commissions who have reviewed this item: Planning Commission, Transportation, C2E2, as well as Housing. We'll go in that order and invite Mr. Hughes to find a microphone. And
thank you. Chair Dorsey, the Planning Commission heard this item on our April 10th meeting. Primarily of our discussion focused around 4 areas: bird-friendly glass, the extent to which county policies support its inclusion and at what level and height of that glass; the extent to which the tabletop feature will remain and the plan within the applicants for that tabletop feature; and a discussion around the affordable housing contributions that the applicant plans to make; and finally, a support for the Transportation Commission's desire for the site parking requirements to be reduced on site. We approved it unanimously, both a amendment motion to endorse the parking reduction and a general approval for the whole site. Sorry, pause there for a moment. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Hughes. You, well, concisely summarized a very layered set of discussion, so thank you. Moving next to the Transportation Commission, do we have Mr. Slatt joining us virtually?
Yes. Mr. Slatt, there he is.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Transportation Commission, this is Chris Slatt speaking. We heard this as unanimously supported the approval of both the site development and the amendment to Metropolitan Phases 4 and 5 to support the off-site parking. Additionally, we made a recommendation to the board that this site be approved for a lower parking ratio than is requested by the applicant, solely to give additional flexibility to the applicant, so that if market conditions change between now and construction, they could reduce the parking ratio without coming back for a discussion, or if they find, for instance, some sort of technical issue during final design that make it difficult to provide the number of parking spaces that they have initially proposed, be able to deal with that eventuality without having to come back for a site plan amendment to change that parking ratio. Or even if after construction they find that they need to maybe take one of those parking spaces out in order to expand the bike parking, or add additional electrical infrastructure for additional EV parking spaces or something like that. That would be something they can do without coming back to the board. So I will keep it very brief. We're very supportive of the development. We really thank the applicant for working with SPRC. We think this development came a long way between initial submission and where we are right now. Really appreciate the pedestrian walkway through what's a major super block and the design revisions to make the building really continue to work well if and when Route 1 comes down to grade. And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Slatt. We'll move next to our Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission, Cindy Lewin. We don't have her virtually?
No.
That's okay. We do have a letter from C2E2 as well as their scorecard report appended to it. So we will make sure to note that that is part of the public record. And do we have Anika Montgomery from the Housing Commission with us this morning?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the county board members. The Housing Commission, we did vote in favor. We did have one board member, commissioner, who was against it due to the that this particular project did not provide on-site CAS cash units. But overall, we did vote to approve the on-site project. We do desire to have more on-site committed affordable units. But we do understand that the pressures of the AHIS and funding. So we request that the funding for AHIS be increased if possible. Let's see, what else did we say? I think that was it for this particular site. I have to speak for another one, but for this one, it was pretty straightforward. We just request more funding to the AHIS funding so that future projects can be committed, on-site projects, CAF units can be committed on-site.
Thank you very much, Ms. Montgomery. We appreciate it. All right. We're now ready to move to any public speakers. Do we have any, Ms. Jacobs?
I don't believe so. We had one, Cynthia Lewin, but I believe that's just a duplicate entry from the public, from the commission speakers.
Otherwise, no public speakers.
Correct.
On a site plan bringing 600 and some odd units to a community. That might be a first. Wow. I say with a great deal of puzzlement, the discussion is now with the county board. And given that we have had all of our commissions, even with suggestions for improvement, everyone is unanimously supported this project. We have no one here to speak. I think it's best to get a motion on the table first to make our discussion most efficient. Are you ready, Ms. Garvey?
I am, and it's three parts here. I'll move that we basically adopt the manager's recommendation for items 33A, B, and C, and that is to A, adopt the ordinance attached to the staff report dated April 14, 2023, to rezone the property known as 1460 Richmond Highway from RAH 3.2 multifamily dwelling and hotel district to CO Crystal City, mixed-use Crystal City District. And then B, in addition, that we adopt the ordinance also attached to the staff report dated April 14 for site plan 466 to permit the construction of up to approximately 8.64 FAR total density, including approximately 527,128 square feet, doesn't sound approximate to me, but anyway, of residential floor area, 639 residential units, that is, and 3,885 square feet of retail floor area, with modifications as set forth in the staff report and other modifications necessary to achieve the proposed development, subject to the conditions of the attached ordinance. And C, finally, I also move that we approve the site plan amendment in the April 14 staff report to modify required parking and permit off-site parking for the Americana Hotel site plan project at Met Park Phase 4-5, otherwise known as the Bartlett, subject to all previously approved conditions and amended conditions 1, 38, 50, and 51. I think that's good.
Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Crystal. All right, Ms. Garvey, would you like the first crack at speaking to this with any combination of questions, comments, inquiries, whatever?
Okay. I'd actually like to have a little more discussion about biophilia, if that's all right, and a couple of issues that actually aren't maybe so specific to this building. I do think it's great, but looking at it and that facade, I keep thinking I'd like to see a lot more green, and I know you can't tell residents what to do. And I also do worry about the bird-friendly glass, which I noticed the Planning Commission talked about. And I wonder if Mr. Hughes wanted to, there's some notes in your letter, if there's any more flavor to that discussion. I continue to worry that we don't, and this is on us, not on the applicant really, but that there ought to be bird-friendly protective glass going up higher than 36 feet. Is there anything more you want to add from the discussion you all had?
I would simply characterize it as a continual and recurring conversation that the commission has at many site plans, to what extent county policy requires it and to what extent the applicant is willing to provide it. And then once the applicant's willing to provide it, to what extent it is necessary on buildings. And there are wonderful resources that have been provided to us by many stakeholders. But in the absence at the moment of county policy, we are always sort of in this quagmire of exactly what, when, and where to do on the bird-friendly glass. So.
Exactly. Thank you. I think it's something I need to be working on in the future a little bit, because I think we probably need to be going up farther. I also, if I've got the floor here for a moment.
Go for it.
Okay. and I think I'll ask the applicant. One, it'd be great to have a few more trees. It's nice looking at it, and I noticed the nice flangy things, and this is just personal, right? But I probably represent a lot of people. I'm not telling you need to do this. But I have seen places where you have like nice vines going up, a whole lot more green covering all of that hardscape going up and down. And is there any way to provide, I guess it would be suggested planters for people to have on their railings so that it doesn't fall off on people in the street and be dangerous, but that people can easily make it easy for people to put a little green up and down the side of that building. Have you thought about that at all?
We have, and I might be able to flip to an image here. I didn't spend too much time on it as we click through.
I did warn you when we met earlier.
No, I recall. And no, I think, look, this is something that clearly as a firm, we care deeply about in terms of making sure that where we can within the architecture, we provide those opportunities. I think the nice thing about this one is, again, in terms of the share of balconies, we've got a fairly significant share of these units that do have balconies. And I think from an operations perspective, ensuring that we have the ability to obviously provide this space within the balcony for those planters, but make sure that from a maintenance standpoint, it's not too difficult to get water out there, and kind of the practical considerations that you're going to run into as we encourage people to, and if you might want to flip to the one where we show, and this is a little bit dark, this was a response to a very similar comment, which at this point is included at the upper end of the podium level here, where we do have these units that have additional space outside. And so we've tried to incorporate, I think, what you're describing with some sort of softening between the units that allow for vines and other plants to both provide a practical purpose, but also soften up the pedestrian experience as well as you walk by this building. But noted, and I think as we move forward from an operations perspective, we should just make sure that we have the ability to serve the practical uses that always come into play when you evaluate things like this, because we want to make it as easy as possible for people to have small gardens and planters outside.
Absolutely, thank you. And it's something I think I'm planning to work on, again, not on you, with our Chief Climate Officer that we have. I just think we can be doing a whole lot more in this area. And at the moment, you're certainly meeting all kinds of requirements. The lack of speakers and concern and all of the approvals you've gotten shows this really is it's a good building and a great improvement on the site. Look forward to getting to the top and seeing the view. I think it's going to be pretty incredible. That's great. And as I say, I intend to be working a little more for my colleagues and our staff on a little more protection for the birds and trying to find ways to get more green up and down our buildings, because I think we can do that. And I think we can do that probably with the existing building you've got here. It's not really preventing anything. And hopefully when we get that helix built, it'll sort of inspire people as well.
Help.
And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. DeFerranti, then Ms. Crystal, and then Mr. Carantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, there are two sort of related topics on climate. I think you touched on it a little bit, but in earlier conversations, but did you consider solar on the roof? You also mentioned the overall JBG plan. Love an update. There was once a time where a large company talked abstractly about working on solar, and then they delivered a huge facility in Danville that we're partnering on. And I like the latter stage of things a little bit more than. So first on the roof, and then maybe one of you could speak to the overall efforts on climate.
So I'm happy to address the first question in terms of solar. I think with this building, and we did study that, one of the issues we've run into is just given the size and the requirements that we like to see in terms of space for amenities and other green areas, we just didn't have the room for it. And in terms of the cost benefit, you might be able to fit a small panel here or there, but not enough to move the needle. And so, so that's kind of the answer on the first part. And then I think Kim is here from JBG Smith as well. She might be able to speak a little bit in more detail about our broader efforts around sustainability and how it applies to this project, if that'll be helpful.
Sure, thank you. And I don't know that I need every piece of it, but I did want a little flavor of the sense of the plans and the work to get towards an electrical supply that might be renewable.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. In 2021, JBG Smith committed to carbon neutrality across our entire portfolio, which means that any of our new development coming into the portfolio falls under that particular commitment. While in the interim, we are making purchases for renewable energy credits and carbon offsets. The plan, first and foremost, involves being a good steward with respect to energy and water consumption on site. So we proactively actually connect all of our buildings to central energy management so that we can take advantage of any proactive energy management and reduce that overall demand. As the team mentioned, on-site solar that was really available when you do have the size of the building and the size of the roof. It really doesn't lend itself. We continue to explore off-site solar as an organization to replace those renewable energy credit purchases, et cetera. As you probably understand, the market in general came across several disruptors with respect to things that happened in Texas that impacted large off-site solar and wind developments, et cetera, and so forth. Our current contracts for renewables goes through the end of this year, at which time we, again, will be picking off that off-site solar exploration. But we're always looking to those opportunities to reduce our dependence on renewable energy credit purchases and actually look to higher quality ways to achieve that carbon neutrality and also, improve how we're handling those types of purchases.
Great, thank you. I'm mindful that 3 or 4 years ago, we were talking about 12% above ASHRAE as being great, and this is 27. And I'm also aware that renewable credits are can be workable as a solution. So appreciate it, and just grateful for the steps that we have taken and eager for the next steps given the evidence of the last 2 months on climate. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Crystal.
Sure. So one, I think, relatively quick question, and then a couple of longer ones. I'll jump in here. Looked like in that penultimate slide, it went pretty quickly, but with regard to the AHIF contribution, we know we're talking about the $7.5 million for additional density, which is incredibly exciting. I know the Planning Commission talked to some length about on-site versus off-site, knowing the opportunity for the crystal houses. I think this is a really wonderful thing for the area. I think I saw that you all were also including the $2.1 million in cash for the base contribution. Are you prepared to say now? Because I know you don't have to make that decision yet, but that's where we're headed. So we're talking about $9.6 million total contribution.
That's correct. The condition for the baseline contribution is written such that the decision doesn't need to be made now, but we wanted to give a sense of scale, what that would look like.
Okay, that's really helpful. Let me go next to parking to talk a little bit about that. And let me frame this by saying, actually, I think this is an opportunity for us to think about our off-site provision of our residential parking minimums policy, because I think there's some policy learning here. So I'll frame this up by saying I am really excited to see this sort of sharing through the agreement. And I've had a little conversation with our staff about this. I would, in fact, love to see more of this happening, and particularly in Crystal City. I really appreciated the conversation the Transportation Commission had that Mr. Slott represented about, well, could this be parked at a lower ratio? I am not going to push for that. I think generally where the applicant is reasonable enough. I am really glad to see, I think the on-site ratio is something like 0.28. And so what I'm seeing here is a project where the most expensive and most permanent kind of parking being built is relatively minimal. And I think that is exactly what this sort of arrangement with another site allows for. We have not seen a lot of it. I sort of, my hypothesis here is because it could be burdensome for the receiving site. In this case, it's the same ownership helps. But I would love to know any insights that you all have for us from the applicant's perspective, and then anything staff might want to add about opportunities for us to think about. I know, for example, that we are acting today on a site plan amendment for the receiving site, the Bartlett, and in order to reduce parking further or change the configuration of parking there, we would need another site plan amendment for the Bartlett, which is to say to come back to the board. Do you see that as an obstacle for doing these types of arrangements in the future? What else should we know as we think about that policy now, I think about to hit its 5th birthday within the next year or so, to allow for more of these types of arrangements?
Sure, I can speak to that briefly. So I think it is accurate that there are some barriers with respect to the way site plans are administered, that typically the approval is essentially the minimum parking ratio permitted, and that if there's going to be a further reduction, that's typically got to go back to the county board for approval. Other barriers include obviously ownership, right? I mean, this is a situation where you've got common ownership. That's not usually the case, right, throughout Arlington. So it makes it more difficult to do that kind of sharing. I do think it's interesting that, the Bartlett was approved about 10 years ago, and at that point, it was a 1-to-1 parking ratio. What was required was 1 space per unit, which I think we know is excessive in our metro corridors. And so while that was probably overbuilt, considering what the demand is today, it does give us this opportunity to flex down and have some sharing as we rely on other modes of transportation in the metro corridors.
Great. And if there's anything Mr. Lamb or anyone else joining us from staff wanted to add, I know having had a little conversation with you all when we adopted that policy in 2017, 2018, there was a lot of conversation or a lot of worry in particular about the Orange Line corridor, but this real sense that there was a lot of excess parking capacity in Crystal City. So, from your perspective, is there, are there potential amendments to that policy or its application that could be encouraging these types of arrangements elsewhere, particularly in Crystal City or Pentagon City?
Well, like you said, off-site shared parking is something supported not only by the residential parking guidelines, but also the sector plan itself. And I will mention that one thing staff do look at when reviewing, these types of requests is ensuring the off-site spaces are accessible and available. So we do require some kind of easement to be recorded that identifies both the grantor and the grantee, as well as how these spaces will be accessed. So that is part of staff's review, and we do that as part of any kind of site plan amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Here's a little bit of a curveball for our county attorney. In order for staff to achieve that easement, would that require such an easement between the two parties to come before the board, or could that be done administratively? Or, I guess, approved or acknowledged, right, since we wouldn't be involved in that easement?
I'll have to look into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I bring all of this up just to say I think this is an area for us to consider more of. I know planning has a lot on their plate, but as projects are being built, right, in many cases, parking is expensive and it's permanent on site. And so I think we should really be pushing ourselves to have a policy or set of policies, as Mr. Lamb pointed out, both with the residential parking minimums and the sector plan, that not only allow for, but encourage this. So whether that's potential administrative review, so that the receiving site doesn't have to come back for site plan amendments or others, I think there's a real opportunity to push further here. Okay, I'll yield the floor.
We'll go to Mr. Karantonis, and you can reload for round 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Please proceed. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the line of questioning of Ms. Crystal is extremely important, and I cannot stress enough how much I align with this thinking. I mean, ancillary parking, the ability to use optimal in an optimal way of parking resources is very important. I'm very happy to see that in this particular case, we have a situation where we can manage that. This is only improving the project. I wanted to just dial back for a moment on 2 things. The one that Ms. Garvey has touched on the bird-friendly glass. This building, the reason why it is reasonable to look at exceeding a little bit our minimum requirement of 36 feet height bird-friendly glass is this building has significant fenestration. It's also very efficient fenestration. So, and it's a high building. So there is a reasonable thinking of birds hitting this building above 36 feet. And I believe that at the Planning Commission, the discussion was that the standard is about 100 feet height. The question for staff and for the applicant is this a decision that is actually negotiated? So have we tried to get a higher delivery on bird-friendly glass above 36 feet, and for economic reasons, for whatever other reasons, it was determined that this is not economically feasible?
So I think that question is for the applicant as to whether or not there was some.
Or staff.
Okay.
Yeah. Whether there was a pathway to higher to bird-friendly glass above 36 feet, and it was deemed impossible to deliver because, for example, because of the cost of this glass.
Well, why don't we ask the applicant first, since I don't think our staff should comment on your costs.
I realize that this is obviously an ongoing policy discussion, and in terms of the project we put forth, we wanted to be responsive to the existing policy. I think one of the things that we can look into as part of this discussion is namely the area between, 0 feet and 8 feet, which is not included as part of the policy. And I think just in terms of where the shrubs and other small trees are on this site, that does have the potential for additional collisions. And so as we finalize the storefront design, we do want to evaluate the practicality of starting that fritting for the bird glass at 8 feet, because there could be scenarios where that doesn't make a lot of sense if you've got a 15-foot tall glass pane with only half of it being covered and by the frit. So that is something that we're continuing to evaluate as part of kind of our go-forward strategy to make sure that those high-impact areas that we know exist, particularly at the ground level, that we're kind of thoughtful about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. The other question that they had is on the full electrification of the building. One thing that is always discussed with these newer buildings is why is it unavoidable to have still fossil fuel supported boilers and warm water generation in the building. I can understand why, for example, a commercial kitchen is still on gas, but why is it so difficult to use electric heaters and boilers for the water that's used in the building?
Okay. Did you all get that?
But that was for the applicant.
We did, and I think we have Ben from Cyclone on, who's part of the project team. He might be able to speak in more detail to some of those considerations.
Sure. Thank you for the question. No, electrification is possible with electric resistance heat, but that is something that is not a good technology to use now. It's going to go away. So heat pump technology is where projects are going to. However, in cold climates, the heat pump technology is not far enough developed yet to operate in cold conditions. It requires additional sources of heat. So we studied this. We did a complete carbon zero analysis on the project and actually determined that with the mix of the grid in Virginia, that actually using on-site fossil fuel uses less carbon overall in the project until approximately the year 2040. So that gives time for technology to develop, and it's only being used in central heating systems at that time. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple more questions, Mr. Chair.
Well, let's do round two to see if others have questions.
Thank you.
We're ready at that round two. Ms. Garvey is good. Mr. DeFerranti, please.
I think this question is for staff regarding housing and the Planning Commission's discussion, and I'm not sure, it might be something we need to get back to, but the Planning Commission's discussion and Mr. Brown's vote regarding affordable on-site units. My understanding is that longtime understanding is that we cannot require on-site units, and that's not how our 4.1 is structured. There are a couple of comments. I guess it's two questions. One is, do we have thoughts about how we might encourage on-site units more, or what went into the analysis and conversation that led this to be a contribution instead of on-site? That's the first question. And I see Mr. Fusarelli has appeared magically, so he may be answering this question.
Certainly. Good morning, board members. Board Member DeFerranti, with respect to that question, I think it might be helpful just to clarify, and I think this came up in one of the responses that Mr. Whitmore had earlier to Ms. Crystal's question. When it comes to the base provisions of the zoning ordinance for the affordable housing commitment, that's an option that the developer has, and they have the choice to make that, or they have the opportunity to make that decision at a date certain. Doesn't need to be today, it's in the future, it's stipulated in the conditions. So they have an option, and that's how our current regulatory framework is set up. When it comes to any additional density above the standards that are set forth in our zoning districts, that's where we do have the opportunity for the negotiation. We work closely with our housing staff to understand, on a site-by-site basis, are there preferences or opportunities and considerations to either pursue more strongly and encourage more strongly an on-site realization of those committed affordable units or a cash contribution. So just hopefully it's helpful just to make that distinction and clarify sort of the two different realms in which we do have more persuasion than not.
Thank you, Mr. Fusarelli. Very kindly, you've explained that to me before, so my apologies for not having it immediately. I guess the question then would be, in the decisions with respect to bonus on this site, can you describe a little bit of the factors that are leading where we're headed with respect to the contribution in lieu of on-site? And there are, in my view, there are arguments for cash in lieu of on-site. Can you talk a little bit about the bonus and the decisions that might have gone into this project with respect to that part of the housing piece?
Certainly. I'll add just a couple brief perspectives, and Mr. Lamb may have more to add. But I think in this particular instance, recognizing the commitments and the opportunities at the Crystal Houses block, just several blocks down the street on South Eid Street, and leveraging the opportunity we have there, we saw, I think, an opportunity to leverage the contributions that we could realize through the additional density or through the additional affordable housing commitments on this site to a nearby site where we are working in partnership to realize hundreds of units of additional committed affordable. So in this case, I think that was an overarching perspective that sort of directed staff's thinking on this. And it may not be the same for other projects. It's something that was specific here, and we would give full consideration to the next project in terms of whether that would be a similarly desirable approach.
Thank you, Mr. Fusarelli. I don't know if Mr. Lamb, did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Just to, I guess, add more context and numbers to this discussion, one thing housing staff looked at was the degree of leverage that can be had at the Crystal Houses. So, 93 committed affordable units at 99 years versus what they looked at on site could have been somewhere between 25 to 30 CAFs at the Americana for, 30 years.
Thank you. Those numbers are very helpful, and I'm reminded in your comments as well, Mr. Fusarelli, that Mr. Hughes, you were described as pointing out that your general perspective, but that this is virtually across the street. Appreciate the chance to just work through it again, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ms. Crystal.
Yeah, just want to associate myself with that. I think sometimes when we bemoan the paying out rather than doing on-site, it is rarely when there is a project as exciting as the one directly across the street in this case. I also just wanted to make a quick comment before we as we cruise towards wrapping up this item. Mr. Hughes, I think this is probably the last time we will see you in this capacity. Is that right? I just wanted to thank you for your long service. I know at least 2 terms on our planning commission, and really appreciate your insights, particularly on that issue of on-site versus off-site or contributions to affordable housing, which I know has been an area of passion for you. So thank you to you, and thank you to your family, well represented today, for sharing your contributions with the county for all of this time. The last thing I just wanted to touch on before we moved, as we move towards the vote, is one of the other major contributions to this project, which is to Metro Market Square, or the public space realization, the opportunity to realize public space plans, which I know is so important to members of our Crystal City community in particular. The need for investment in public spaces has been such a recurring issue there, as we've talked in multiple capital improvement plans. And so I know staff had talked a little bit to the Parks and Recreation planning staff. Would love to just get it as a matter of record on discussion today about how this contribution will enable Metro Market Square, which at the time of CIP adoption, I think still envisioned or was contingent on some amount of developer contribution. So could you just tell us a little bit about how this finalizes the budget and what, if any, that means for the timeline for realizing this important public space in Crystal City?
Yeah, so the aforementioned Metro Market Square is, a priority public space in Crystal City, and the identified contribution from the site plan for that project will likely fully fund the project itself, and any kind of residual funds beyond that will help fund other projects in Crystal City. But in terms of Metro Market Square, we are, targeting a timeline. However, this does, as you mentioned, is kind of based on developer contributions. So it kind of depends on kind of the timeline for this project in terms of permitting and eventual construction. But we are kind of targeting initial planning and community engagement this year to next year, and then with the anticipated construction somewhere between 2025 and 2026.
Great. I think that's really exciting. And then if all goes smoothly, when would you be looking to deliver this project?
Sometime in 2027 if we move forward imminently.
Okay, fantastic. So really glad to see it on both counts. And I'll just, before I yield entirely, give what would probably amount to closing comments, which is to just share my enthusiasm for the project. I think the community benefits associated with it are genuinely exciting. They are commensurate with a project of really significant magnitude here. Mr. Chair, I noted your point about how surprising it was to have no public comments on a project of this size. It's that old real estate adage, right? Location, location, location. So this is clearly, if the omission of public comments indicates an area where community members are perhaps more comfortable. But just delighted to see it, and particularly envisioning this as sort of a found site, right? And how it will end up, I believe, fronting the new Route 1 to grade, which is very representative of the transformation of Crystal City in general into an area, a home and a neighborhood for so many folks that is truly walkable, that is full of great public spaces and has affordable options for neighbors across the income spectrum. So just delighted to be able to support the project, and my thank you to not only the applicant, but our team, who I know had to do quite a bit of analysis to understand how this might fit into our plans, the Planning Commission for their thoughtful work, Transportation Commission, and others. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just say in conclusion, let me commend the staff, the applicant, really, particularly for the leaning into the zero carbon feasibility and really doing what I think is an underappreciated analysis that, electricity or not is really not the question. It's at what point you actually achieve the ability to receive that electricity in a clean way, which would create a climate advantage over existing fossil fuel use. And at some point, this stuff we're moving as a world towards the place where the choice to go carbon-free will marry with the technological realities of designing efficient systems for buildings. And I am convinced from your responses to Mr. Karantonis' question that you have done that due diligence. And so I really, really appreciate that. And I'd also just like to really thank Mr. DeFerranti for surfacing the conversation on housing, which I believe exposes the great work that our staff does in making these very thoughtful decisions. Again, it's not a matter of on-site or not. It's a matter of whether or not those on-site units are going to create an opportunity for people of diverse incomes to be a part of neighborhoods of opportunity. And that's why we desire on-site units in certain circumstances. But when you have an opportunity to leverage many more unit years within the same neighborhood of opportunity, hello, we got to take that. To stand on a principle of on site in the case where 2 blocks away, you can help many more households for many more years, to me, doesn't pencil out. So I appreciate staff for forwarding that work, while not to excuse or not to dismiss those who want to make sure we don't consider whether units are provided on-site or off-site lightly. They're absolutely right. We don't want to be in the position where we just think, well, we can leverage more units, but we are denying people to be a part of areas of opportunity. It's something that is, I think, as you said very well, Mr. Fusarelli, it's case by case, and we bring our best thought to making those decisions. So I am supportive of all of this. I'm glad that the community seems to agree as well, and it looks like the last word will go to Mr. Karantonis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually had an additional question, but it's really not a very important one. It's about the configuration of the sidewalk along South East. I think we can discuss that later. I feel that the curb cuts that we have there are pretty significant, and this project is delivering such a walkability improvement there, and it's at crawling distance from Met Park. That I believe that we need to think in the implementation, in the construction of the project creatively on some more continuous, so that it's not interrupted by so much space dedicated to cars. Cars will be still able to cross into the garage entrances, but we want to configure the pavement and the elevation of this pavement in a way that works better for pedestrians and safer for everybody. And with that, I can say a couple of things about, actually confess my enthusiasm for this project as well, and align with all the comments that have been made so far by Mr. Christopher and by you. I do think that the applicant has really worked very hard, and commend also our staff for following that, and the community as a whole. This is a very good project. It replaces a place that is kind of a witness of an era that people will probably riddance. This kind of modernism with disregard of so many attributes of urban living that we value today, and livability attributes that we value today. It's a welcome addition to the ensemble of Crystal City, and I think this also adds a lot of resiliency. Crystal City National Landing is probably now one of the central business, the best potential to commercial ratio, which makes it in these troubled times for office occupancy, makes it even more resilient, and it will sustain a higher level, a better level of urban living right there. I think the contribution to affordable housing is absolutely unique, and I fully understand how much bang for the buck we're getting by the very fact that we have the opportunity to locate the affordable units just across the street. The building is green, far greener than many other site plans that passed in front of this that we passed even in the recent past. I disagree that I agree that carbon intensity is important, and it begins at how green our electricity grid is. But the moment that we green up, we have to do that very fast. The electric grid, we have to have buildings that are ready to use these electrons. And the more we insist in electrifying buildings, and the better the position will be where we will be when the grid will be greener and less carbon dependent. With all that, I'm enthusiastically supporting the motion to approve the site plan.
Thank you. I think we're now ready to move to a vote on this item. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Mr. Carantonis? Any opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it 5-0. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time today. Ms. Jacobs, are you ready to call the next item?
Yes, items number 34A through R is the adoption of the fiscal year 2024 county budget and appropriation resolutions, calendar year 2023 tax rates, and other various related fees, code amendments, and resolutions.
Thank you very much. Public hearings on these items have closed, so this discussion is entirely with the board. To begin, we do have our staff available: Budget Director Stevenson, DMF Director Meredith. I don't see Ms. Hughes today. Are we? Oh, she's virtual. Welcome, our Budget Coordinator, Ms. Hughes. Welcome to all. Are there any questions before we begin our process of considering items 34A through R? Mr. Carantonis, any questions?
No, Mr. Chair, the hand is listed, Joe.
Oh, that's okay. All right, we're going to get right into it then, colleagues. So I would like to go ahead and move the first set of these. These are sort of the big ticket items, 34A, which is the fiscal year 24 county budget resolution, appropriations resolution, and appropriations. And so I'd like to move the manager's recommendation, which is to, in 4 parts, adopt the FY24 budget resolution, which is attachment 1, the FY24 county appropriations resolution, attachment 2, 3, authorize the county manager to negotiate and sign grant agreements with nonprofits that result from budget appropriations, subject to review as to form of those agreements by the county attorney, and 4, to appropriate funding from non-departmental to departments as outlined in attachment 3, to allocate funding for bonuses. That is 34A. For 34B, I would like to move the manager's recommendation to adopt a calendar year 2023 real estate tax rate of $1.01 per $100 of assessed value, using the resolution attached as attachment 1. 2, to adopt the calendar year commercial real estate tax rate for transportation initiatives at the rate of 12.5 cents per $100, using the attached resolution, also attachment 1. And 3, adopt the calendar year 2023 sanitary district tax for stormwater management at the current rate of 1.7 cents per $100 of assessed value, using the resolution, also attachment 1 in that report. And then 34C, to move the manager's recommendation to adopt a calendar year 2023 general personal property tax rate of $5 per $100 of assessed value, using the resolution attached as attachment 1, and a personal property tax rate equal to the real estate tax rate for public service corporations, using the resolution attached therein. And then in addition, to adopt a calendar year 2023 resolution, which is an attachment 2 of that staff report, fixing the methodology that shall be utilized in distributing the state's block grant for personal property. I don't think I need to describe all of the numbers. Second. So, all right, thank you for that second. That meets with approval from our attorney. Thank you. So I'll speak briefly to it. These are the items which fix the amount that the county is going to, it fixes our budget and the amounts that we're going to appropriate and where those will be specifically appropriated to. That's 34A, 34B, establishes the tax rates, which will go unchanged from the previous fiscal year, as well as the personal property tax rate, which is at the same rate but does not have any adjustments. It looks very much like personal property tax rates from fiscal 22 and before. So that's generally what we have. Any further discussion or comments? All right. We'll move to a vote, and then we'll have some comments to wrap that all up. So, Mr. Karantonis, if you're with us, we'll move to a vote on items 34A, B, and C. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it, 5-0. We have the base of a budget. All right. At this point, I would like to move in the county board's own motion some guidance to accompany the budget that was just passed. Ms. Jacobs could project that on the screen, and then I'll invite Ms. Crystal to detail the first three items of this. Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. And Ms. Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to put forward some guidance as part of the chair's motion. The first regards a transition that I have talked about extensively from this dais and therefore won't belabor too much the substance of, which is a transition to a notice of funding available process for awarding human and community services. This is an effort to respond to with a good deal, in fact, almost 3 years at this point, of community input to envision a new way of allocating funding, particularly one rooted in racial equity, for how we make decisions about what shorthandedly might be called nonprofit funding. Certainly to try to do that in a way that aligns not only with our racial equity resolution, but also aligns with our goals of transparency and decision-making, which are very ad hoc, non-system, I think has really failed to live up to. The implementation of this is going to be somewhat, I think the technical term might be wonky or challenging because this notice of funding available process is beginning now. The team is hard at work developing the NOFA application consistent with the goals and values envisioned by our community leaders, as well as within the next couple of months to begin recruiting from community members with lived experience to serve as a panel along with subject matter experts and make recommendations to the board. The process happening now means that recommendations will be made as part of next year's budget deliberations, and that those dollars will be handed out to the winning applicants on July 1st of 2024. So here we are deliberating the fiscal year 2024 budget. What we're really talking about is an amount of funding that will need to go out at the start of fiscal 2025. However, we cannot fully punt that question until 2025 because as we convene that panel of community members and subject matter experts, we need to give them a sense of the bucket that they have to award. It also would have been ideal to be able to give applicants a pretty firm answer on how much funding is available when we release that notice of funding available. But in consultation with our partners at the United Way of the National Capital Area, who have advised us on how other communities have done this, it is not without precedent to offer a range of funding available at the time of releasing the notice, which will be at the very beginning of the fall, which is to say Q1 of fiscal 2024. However, we really do, again, want to be able to tell that panel when they sit down in January to start their work of reviewing those proposals, how much money they have to work with. A roundabout way of saying, I would like us to give direction to the manager to bring forward in November of this year, at the time of fiscal 2023 closeout, options to allocate additional one-time money to that NOFA process. So to crosswalk that with the timeline I just laid out, that means a range would be given when the NOFA is posted and applications are welcomed. But hopefully by taking action in November with the options the manager brings forward, the board can give some assurance to the panel thinking about funding, how much funding they have to allocate. The board, which will not include me at that time in 2024, may also wish to think about additional additional monies, if the panel has recommendations about how additional dollars could be spent, I think that would be very welcome. But we really do want to give them a sense of the sandbox in which they are making recommendations. Again, this direction would be to bring forward options in November of this year for allocating one-time closeout money. This does assume there will be one-time closeout money at the conclusion of fiscal 2023 when that wraps up at the end of June. If passed as prologue, I think we can assume there will be some amount that the manager may be able to bring forward for our consideration. Let me pause, see if there are any questions or clarification needed. I know that the kind of span across multiple years is complicated indeed here, so.
Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, just a quick question. As I understand it, we're asking the manager to come forward with options, but it's not committing the board in any way. I mean, it's possible that there isn't closeout or there's some other much greater need at that point, and we're sort of looking way out. So I just want to make sure, I mean, we're sort of sending a signal, but it's not really committing the board. And I always like to reserve the ability to make adjustments depending on what the facts are at the time.
That's right. Let me share, both validate what you're saying and then also just share some of the consequences of why I think it will be important for the board to act. We have about $1 million or $1.5 million in existing grants to nonprofits that have happened through our kind of ad hoc non-process that we're recommending now be competed. And so that establishes the floor. And when we advertise the notice of funding available, that will be the floor. I think for all of the reasons you all have engaged with and discussed and heard from, and certainly the significant interest across nonprofits in the community that we saw when we took this change to the community in January, I think we'd be remiss indeed to simply invite more people to compete for the same pie. So while I think there will be an imperative for this process to go well, to allocate more funding, you are absolutely correct, Ms. Garvey. There is no fiscal obligation implied in this direction at this time.
Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you for that question, and also for your answer. And you've done a lot of work on this, and we've had a number of discussions. I think that associated with this, you shared a little bit of a context, short memo that kind of described this. And I was just rechecking the resolution website and the board's webpage. It's fair to say that memo seeks to help us further interpret this. I had a little bit of a question. I simultaneously agree that there's some ad hoc legacy-related nonprofits that I would not say are most, just to be concrete, most equitably focused. And I would also say that I'm very leaning forward towards this and an additive process, and mindful that the first sentence here says transition. So I guess any thoughts on both the memo and the spirit of trying to be additive towards our equity goal? Because I think that an additive funding environment, in large part, though not exclusively, is likely to sustain this work most effectively. So the memo and that spirit.
Sure. So the memo was just in writing what I just said in introducing the guidance.
Right.
I'm happy to
Great.
for visual learners.
Sure.
And then in terms of when you say additive, do you mean additive is in more funding, as I was just speaking to Ms. Garvey, or
more funding in total, and how that fits with the sort of the transition to the competitive process? It sounds like the goal is both the transition as well as in total to make our work more robust in the area as a whole. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the sort of transition here when we had the community leaders group come in December to present again when we voted on the resolution in February. And the emphasis there, the point about transition is that we don't really have a process in terms of allocating money to nonprofits who come to the board seeking discretionary dollars. I know we've talked about this largely as, there are sort of a couple of buckets of ongoing grants that are allocated by the county board. There are some that really should not be discretionary county board decisions at all, right? These are core functions of human services with which we are contracting. Things like our community's food pantry, right, or homeless services, that it's really important that those be treated as what they are, which are contracts with the Department of Human Services. And the Department of Human Services is working very hard to kind of formalize and professionalize those. And the analogy I've raised before is, we often find ourselves as the board hearing from, understandably, those nonprofit providers delivering core human services needing a plus up, for example, to their budget. But I'm really of the perspective that from a good government and transparency perspective, that should no more be the case than a DES contractor who is experiencing, labor cost overruns on laying new sewer pipe coming to the board, right? That is a matter of a contract issue. So I think this is a good opportunity to emphasize that those things that really are kind of core human services are outside of the scope of what we're talking about here with the transition. What we're really envisioning, or what I'm really envisioning, and what our resolution reflects, is transitioning those asks from nonprofits who are doing great work now or envision doing great work in our communities and want the county to help support something that may not be a core function of government, but is making a difference. And so the kind of historic way of doing that has been applying our best judgment and people, frankly, trading on relationships with board members to get that kind of funding. And now we're going to try to transition to a system or a process that is rooted in transparency and racial equity to do so. So that's what's meant by the transition, and that's what's outside of the transition, if that's helpful.
That is helpful. I think also in part my question was sort of designed to share, as we implement this over the coming years, a desire to see through the work, but the details of that vision to see through may be aligned, but not all 100% in detail. But that's sort of one thought. And a second is you put a ton of work into this, and I'm mindful how much you care about it. I am broadly in support of the spirit, and so my question may have been a little bit a roundabout way of saying thank you for the work.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Crystal, for bringing this forward. It's a logical, thinking and towards implementation of the resolution that we already have adopted. I had the question that I have is, so we expect to nominate, to pick a panel of, as described in the resolution. So this panel, how will this panel interact with, what's the thinking behind this panel interacting with the county manager's office and forming this first approach to the order of magnitude of what you described as a sandbox? So the money that they would consider appropriate to get this process started.
Great question. So to reflect back, what I think you're asking is how, once the panel is convened and reviewing proposals, how will they be able to kind of iteratively engage with the county manager for his budget or the board with theirs about how much funding is available? Is that right, what you're asking?
Exactly. So yes. So there will be, they will have to, are they going to be part of this process, or is it something that resides exclusively in the county manager's office, maybe in collaboration with the county board, to make an initial appropriation at some point, or is this panel going to be participating in deliberately participating in determining how much money would be appropriate to start appropriate?
Yeah, great question. So let me just a quick word on sort of what we mean by panel, where it came from. So this was one of the recommendations of the community leaders group, which worked for a couple of years on envisioning what an equitable process would look like. Really talked about the importance of community members know best whether nonprofits are positioned to do what they say they're going to do and whether they've done it. And so what is happening now is operationalizing that recommendation. The county manager's office represented and led well by Elizabeth Barnett, or Amber Barnett, who is our Deputy Chief Race and Equity Officer. I'm worried I'm going to get titles wrong, so forgive me if so. We know them as Amber and Elizabeth, the second in commands to Samia and Michelle, but essentially our Deputy County Manager working in our Deputy County Manager's colleagues working on racial equity and procurement are two leads on this, working with my participation and future touch points with other board members to operationalize that recommendation about who should be on the panel into a set of steps to recruit them, to put out a call, to engage with the community, showing up, for example, at places of worship or PTA meetings, to try to articulate what is needed and going to be asked of these community members. Once individuals are recruited using, our goal is to do multiple languages for recruitment, et cetera. They will be paired with subject matter experts, which is to say either county staff or others from around the region who have backgrounds in equitable funding or sort of human and community services. They will all together undergo racial equity training so that they are speaking from the same page when they think about how to evaluate these proposals from that lens. Which is, again, that training that our race and equity team have been doing throughout the last couple of years with county staff. So that's how the panel will come together. That's who they are. The idea is that there are only so many variables we can give to a group of people, especially who are volunteers, and ask them to hold ideas in their head. And that's why I come back to the importance of being able to tell them roughly the size of the sandbox they have to allocate. They'll be likely, we were just meeting with our partners at the United Way of the National Capital Area to envision this 2 weeks ago. They will likely be broken out into subgroups to evaluate different proposals depending on how many come through, and to make their recommendations about how to allocate whatever the total amount is that is determined by this board in November. I think there is also an interesting question about how can that panel retain the ability to come back to the county board and say, hypothetically, you allocated $2.5 million. We saw some fantastic projects. If the county board is able to allocate $3 million, $4 million, here are types of additional things that you can fund. And so I think that is a very real and exciting opportunity to kind of build into their recommendations. I think when they're going to engage in a level of review that is as thorough as the one envisioned, there will surely be some ideas about the kind of close competitor projects that they regret not being able to fund. And so I think there is absolutely an opportunity for dialogue as the board, again, approaches those kind of final funding decisions in the adoption of the fiscal 25 budget around this time next year. That was a really long answer, but hopefully I answered your question about the interaction and then who the panel is.
Thank you.
Yes, you did.
Okay, thanks.
For people who are interested in the details and the history, when we post this guidance, you can see that the resolution itself that the board adopted is hyperlinked, as is some supplemental documents and information about this entire process. They'll both be hyperlinked, so if anyone is interested in getting the full background, they can look at it there. I'll say for my part, in looking at this guidance, and I hate to be reductionist after such a lengthy conversation, it's not meant to betray that, but functionally what this is doing is really a smart approach, especially in the first year of implementation of something that crosses budget years that the board hasn't developed a routine for doing. And that's to make sure that at the time of closeout, the next opportunity where we will actually be looking at fiscal capacity, we don't forget this. That will very much be operational during the next calendar year, at the start of the next fiscal year, because one of the principles of this new funding model is that we don't put community organizations that got good, worthwhile programs that have, through this process, been vetted and determined to be necessary, presumably, to give them the wholly inadequate answer of, sorry, there's no room for you. That's a cop-out. And we're making sure that we don't give ourselves that cop-out, that we're actually being thoughtful about resources that we are going to either make available or put in the pot to become available later on to act on any recommendations that come from this technical panel. And I will say, just fundamentally, as this matures, it's really not entirely also about the floor that is set or the upper ceiling that may be envisioned. I hope that this gets to a place where the technical panel is able to make really rigorous decisions, and if whatever conceptual floor we have is not met by the proposals, I don't want the board to fund things that don't have value. So the floor is what we know that we're going to tell the community is going to be available. Doesn't commit us to actually funding at that level if the proposals don't merit it. But on the flip side, if we get a number of proposals that do meet with not only a technical panel, but the board's desire to see move forward, figure out a way to fund it, because that's what would live up to the whole idea of a true equity-based model. So thank you for this guidance. I think this is so important in the first years, but certainly this will evolve as this matures in the county. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to, I'm thinking people who are listening might be kind of wondering, whoa, what's this coming? This is very different, right? And I think it comes out of your work with UNAM. Is that correct? And I want to say, and thank you for your work. I think that all started, I guess it was maybe 3 years ago now or so that we had, or a little more, that we had Andrew here, we're talking with the UNAM group, and then you participated in, I think it was a year-long program. And it's kind of cool. I mean, we as board members participate in programs a lot. It's kind of cool to see how much this one is really making a difference, I think, and really trying to enact it. But if people are, kind of wondering where it came from, they might want to check out UNAM. And we really are trying to change sort of structurally how we do things, and it might be a little bumpy for a while. But thank you for your work, and it's a good step. It's a big step, but it's taken, years to get here. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, one of my colleagues in that fellowship cohort had a project that was building a community gazebo, which has been built and in operation for 2 years. It's so indicative of how systems change. It's really hard and takes a lot longer. There were times I wish I had undertaken a capital project instead, but I think this was the right one to do.
Maybe we could do a small gazebo somewhere while we're waiting.
All right, thank you. So I think everyone's good with that. I will note that we have several other pieces of guidance. We are under no obligation to have the same level of discussion about each of those. Just saying.
All right, I will continue, and yes, I think these are in descending order of intensity of conversation. This one is, I think, relatively straightforward. There was perhaps very little that everyone of the 250-some folks who testified last month when we adopted zoning ordinance amendments to effectuate or allow for expanded housing options agreed upon, but I do think there was widespread agreement that there is need for more affordable housing in Arlington, and also more affordable ownership projects. One of the things I talked about a lot, and I think maybe hopefully some colleagues would associate themselves with it, which was one of the things that was exciting about the zoning ordinance amendments around the missing middle, was that they created the sort of necessary opportunity to allow for nonprofit developers in particular to be able to use that pathway to come up with affordable ownership projects. But as the analysis done by external economists showed us, these projects, especially when they're new, are not naturally going to deliver at the level of affordable ownership. I'll pause here to define affordable ownership. Our zoning ordinance describes ownership affordability as at or below 80% of area median income. So there is some gap between the 100%, 110% AMI affordability of the least expensive projects and that 80% or below. So this is direction to the manager to ask that our staff who are working on the home ownership study now really take into that charge opportunities to provide some gap financing likely that could really help realize a couple of affordable EHO ownership projects. And I think there are a lot of different models. I've had some conversations with different nonprofits in this space for how that funding could work, whether it's gap financing for construction, an acquisition loan that can be relatively patient at low or no interest as a nonprofit works to build out a project. A few different examples, but the homeownership study has already been thinking about some of the tools for potential home buyers and existing homeowners. And this is an opportunity to add to the scope of that study, or a request to add to that scope of that study, thinking about the kind of bricks and mortar construction of affordable homeownership using the EHO pathway, and asking the manager to please come back at the end of this year, December 2023, which is when, by when those homeownership study results would be ready for us to make recommendations about how to fund this type of EHO home ownership pilot program. I've noted here just conceptually that this may be on the order of $1.5 million, could potentially, from what we know, talking to nonprofits, support a few different projects, which could result in as many as 6 ownership units. units. But of course, that would vary based on whatever the staff recommendations would be. And to Ms. Garvey's point about the previous item, this commits us to nothing. It simply asks the manager to bring forward recommendations and also to recommend or to give insights about whether the Affordable Housing Investment Fund could be the right vehicle to use with potentially additional capital beyond what we'll talk about in terms of AHIF capital for committed affordable apartment units. So
thank you. Mr. DeFranti.
Brief, 4 words, full support, thank you very much. Or the very much is 2 minutes.
See, you had it, and then you just kept going. Mr. Karantonis, are you good? All right. Ms. Crystal, please.
Fantastic.
I would be even briefer, full support.
Oh, fantastic. I'm very excited to see what kind of creative projects we might be able to spur with a little bit of financial support. The last one, hopefully this is very easy. We have talked, and it made it into the chairman's mark, the idea of an additional FTE as DHS backbone support. This reflects, there are so many issues that are emerging in our community, childcare, of course, but also things like behavioral health and substance abuse that really cross departments and yet land really in DHS's purview or bailiwick more than others. And I think one of the things we've really learned from when our approaches to those programs are successful is that it certainly requires a quarterback, someone who can really do that intensive policy work to convene teams intra and interdepartmentally, to bring together outside stakeholders, develop roadmaps, execute those roadmaps. So the creation of the position is really designed to do that over time. We know that there will be issues that emerge that are not yet on our agenda that need that type of leadership. But also wanted to reflect with this guidance, our expectation. It has been a personal frustration of mine, I know shared by colleagues, and certainly we've really started to hear some advocacy in the community that we have this fantastic action plan with the Child Care Initiative adopted a couple of years ago. When the pandemic happened, it sort of backburnered that effort, and there is so much in there that is worth pursuing around the idea of affordable childcare in particular, which remains such a gap in our community. So this direction is designed to kind of codify, memorialize the board's expectation that this is a position that will work in a how rather than what over time, but that they would start with implementation of the Child Care Initiative Action Plan.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion? Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you very much for this as well. Particularly, I needed a refresher on the 3 buckets in the plan. Appreciate you doing that, accessibility, availability, and quality, but I really appreciate you mentioning the word affordable, because it's been since 1994 where affordable childcare was on my mind as a key lever to enable people to reach and move out of poverty. So thanks very much for this work.
Thank you. The last piece is concerning collective bargaining agreements. As you all will recall, in December, the board passed resolutions that expressed our good faith commitment to funding the tentative agreements with bargaining units for police and fire as well, which go through FY26, and then the 1-year agreement with AFSCME. And with this budget adoption, we have fulfilled that good faith commitment. But as part of that process, we also uncovered that the agreement did not necessarily capture what had been the contemporaneous conversations that existed with the manager and staff and the various bargaining units, particularly about the wage structure, and specifically the desire to move to from an open range to a step and grade system, which was a mutually shared priority. And so as a result of that, we've got this interesting situation where we've got a collective bargaining agreement, which we fully intend through our efforts and have followed through with supporting, and that we expect will continue to be the primary way in which issues as it relates to employment are governed in the county. But at the same time, this opportunity to discuss outside of collective bargaining how to further implement an effective grade and step system for those 2 units. So through mutual discussions, there has been some progress that has been solidified with the adoption of the budget that creates that step and grade system for both police and fire in in this current fiscal year. And as we move to subsequent fiscal years, that model of having discussions about how to improve that step and grade system, we are using this guidance to encourage the manager to continue to have those conversations and to bring to the board a discussion of any potential recommendations or ideas prior to formulation of budget direction, which will occur in the fall of this year. So creates the expectation that there will be conversations that will exist between the manager and the bargaining units up until that point, findings presented to the board at that point, but the primary responsibility that we all have is to adhere to the collective bargaining agreements. But if there are any enhancements that can be mutually agreeable in the meantime, we will have an opportunity to take a look at them in advance of the next year's budget. Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you to you and the manager for this. I think don't want to repeat just thank you every time, but I do think with the shift in the board, it is relevant and important, and I'm sure that Ms. Garvey and Mr. Karantonis would agree that we're particularly thankful as implementing this will fall to the three of us and two others. So I think our public safety and our employees should know that this is important to the three of us, and I don't want to speak for, but I just think that transition piece needs to be mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions, I think we'll now formally.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Karantonis, I apologize.
Just no problem. I just to underscore the importance that this has for me, as for everybody, all my colleagues here. We have had a very intensive experience with the collective bargaining process, and we see the challenges of an effective transition to step and grade. So I think that this board is really ready to put discussing and about the county manager's openness and investment of time and focus on this issue. So I think that this guidance is really appropriate and important to be part of this document. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so this, Ms. Garvey.
No, just
Yes.
a quick thing. I'll just say thank you as well. I think it's all been said. I plan to mostly say thank you by voting yes on all of this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, so we've put this on the table on our own motion. Now I'd like to formally seek a second on adopting this guidance. Is there one? Seconded by Ms. Garvey. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it 5-0, and this guidance is hereby provided to the manager. And at this time, colleagues, I know we have a number of other budget items, but as most people have been watching, have been concerned about these areas, I don't want to have them wait until the end to maybe hear any summary comments that we may have. I'll get us started until I see other lights go on. But I will say that first, acknowledgements are in order, and I have to be a little bit nostalgic. This is my 8th and last opportunity to be a part of the budget process as an Arlington County board member. And I have to say, of the many things that go into this job, most of them I will miss, but this is one of the things I will miss most. This is something that speaks to the essence of what we do here in local government, and doing it in Arlington County is both, it's edifying, it has a great deal of integrity attached to it, and professional excellence. And so, principal among that, I do want to appreciate our manager, Mr. Schwartz, our deputy county manager, Michelle Cowan, DMF director, Maria Meredith, our budget director, Richard Stevenson, and our budget coordinator, Emily Hughes, principally. You all just do outstanding, outstanding work. Not only in mechanics of the budget, but in shepherding a process that I believe has a lot of integrity and is of high quality. And with that, all of our department heads who faithfully adhere to the directives of the manager to scrub every corner to find efficiencies and savings. We always have an opportunity to consider how to make government work better without necessarily adding resources in order to do so. Colleagues, the way we engage with the entire budget process, both with work sessions and individual conversations and thinking up ideas, engaging through questions with staff. I am very proud of the work that we do together. And our advisory commissions really shine during the budget process with their summary feedback based on their areas of interest, but also our Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, which takes a broader overview while also providing specific departmental comments. It's terrific. And our community, we have so many people engaged, whether it is through outlining their priorities for the budget or speaking at public hearings, sending us letters, emails, coming to Open Door Monday. It is a wonderful part of the Arlington community. So thanks to everyone for helping us get to this point where we can adopt a spending plan that outlines not only the specifics, but our priorities for the year ahead. And speaking about the budget itself, it's certainly not as difficult as it once appeared to be, especially from a revenue side. Thankfully, we've had some upside when it comes to revenue. But it's also important to note that even with this not being as difficult as once feared, we do have uneven revenue growth. So the impact of our spending decisions are disproportionately falling on our residential taxpayers, and we are ever mindful of that. And that also exists within a period where we also have acute needs in our community. And there are also structural issues that we need to address, such as how to make sure that we are right-sizing our funding sources to ensure that ongoing needs are not being funded repeatedly with one-time revenues. We have incredible challenges as it relates to the recruitment and retention of talent across the enterprise, but specifically in some areas where not only are the needs of our community quite acute and pressing, but also in places where it's just really hard to fill. And then we also have priorities that the community has developed that we need to continue to make progress on. So even though the budget wasn't as hard as it once appeared to be, the challenge in Arlington is always going to be difficult because we have so much that we desire to do. And also it's true that Arlington is a place that is very well resourced from a relative standpoint. We should never forget that. And people look at that top line and say, you've got a $1.55 billion budget. Arlington can do anything. But I do want to remind people, and forgive me for being a bit professorial with this, but you take that $1.55 billion and right away we take 39% of it, and those go to the Arlington public schools to educate our children, which is terrific. We don't begrudge that at all, but it's almost 40% right off the top. And then when we think about the 61% left for county operations, more than half of that, about 53% of that, goes to compensation for our personnel. And remember, our personnel are providing direct service to the community. So already, that big $1.55 billion is now down to about $440 million remaining. And of that, over $150 million goes to our requirements or obligations that are non-negotiable, to Metro, to funding the debt service from previously committed investments, to benefits for employees after they separate from the county, and then also to other regional commitments. So in the end of the day, we're really taking that $1.55 billion, and it's really about $280 million, which has to fund all of the operating expenses to support our programs and then anything else. Long story short, it's not a ton for us to do everything. We have to be strategic and judicious. And in that sense, I'm very proud that this budget is both responsive and responsible while also making some strategic, progress on strategic priorities. It's responsive because it recognizes where we are post-pandemic. There are still households who are in need, and we're making sure we're taking care of those needs the best we can through eviction prevention and maintaining an ability to deliver the necessary help to those who necessarily need it. There's also a post-pandemic acute need that exists among people when it comes to their mental and behavioral health, and we're doing a lot of innovative things in this budget to address it. As it relates to housing, we are making sure that our ability to move forward with the Crystal Houses and Barcroft projects, making sure that that's maintained, recognizing that that is, 2,400 or so units of committed affordable housing that will be realized through those projects, while also creating the space within the Affordable Housing Investment Fund to ensure that other projects that we don't know about yet can be funded as well. We're making sure that our planning and economic development departments, which have such a key role in dealing with our office vacancy rate, are sufficiently resourced to have the capacity to be innovative and quick to take advantage of emerging opportunities. It is a responsible budget by not actually increasing the tax rate at all, recognizing that it is uneven in terms of revenue growth. And it is responsible because we are continuing to make sure that ongoing expenses are paid with ongoing revenues. And it's also responsible because by doing all of these fiscally sound things, we should maintain our status within rating agencies as being one of the most responsible municipalities in the country, which will reduce our cost of borrowing, which is especially important in this high interest rate environment. It's also responsible, because we are making the necessary investments in our workforce. Talent and labor is the key to our delivering good government in Arlington County. As much as I'd like to think it's what we do, it's not. And even our great manager, as great as he is, it's not going to work if we don't have tremendous talent that is deploying all of the initiatives that we have. And so investing in them and making sure that we are going to support them in delivering great services to our taxpaying public is incredibly important. Labor market is making this very difficult at this time, and public sector is always going to be less able to be nimble in labor markets that are complex as this. So I appreciate that we're creating capacity to not only deal with these issues, but also to reward our employees with growing living standards. And then I'll just say it's a responsible budget in how we've approached dealing with a lot of these realities, foregoing filling unfilled positions, while that does have a strain on our talent and workforce. It makes people need to work harder, and we get that. We do understand that. But in the absence of having the ability to do everything, this is a responsible way to deal with the challenges that we have. I also just love that our departments have leaned into using technology where appropriate to reduce their discretionary overhead. It's very much a feature of a lot of the budget presentations that we've had, where people are really figuring out how to continue to do the same high level of work, but reducing costs where they can. And I'd also like to appreciate that we are continuing the focus on equity, which is most seen in some of the initiatives from the Department of Parks and Recreation, as well as transportation. Their professional understanding of how to apply equity is very much becoming a part of the work, better work in my opinion, and I appreciate that. But I don't want to forget the strategic priorities, investments in climate and energy, being able to envision the future of libraries and beginning that public process, and also investing in the partners that we have in our various sectors like Columbia Pike and Clarendon and Langston Boulevard to increase their capacity. These are all very important things to position us moving forward. And lastly, I'll say, and thank you all for indulging me, just a sort of note about future budget years that unfortunately I will not be a part of. Arlington is going to really have to think thoughtfully about how to align the revenue it collects with the priorities that it has. Much of the ability to wring every ounce of whatever liquid out of this fruit is virtually gone. And so if the public wants to continue to move forward with making key investments and priorities, making sure that there is revenue alignment, and this is a fancy way of saying tax rates, are in the right place is going to be an important conversation. I certainly hope that economic growth materializes in such a way that doesn't require that conversation, but we can't bank on that. There are so many headwinds when it comes to the broader economy that affects the ability of the commercial sector to grow rapidly that we really have to lean into this whole idea of whether or not the tax rates are going to be sufficient. But that is a conversation for the next budget process. As for this one, I am pleased to support the work that we have done and to thank you all for your role in it. All right, we'll move next to Ms. Garvey.
Thank you. So I've done a few more budgets than you, Mr. Chair. If you count school board, a whole lot more. I would say this has been the smoothest and best budget process I've gone through in over a quarter century in many ways. Thinking about that, one I think is, I want to first echo your thanks to the staff. I mean, this is an incredible county. I mean, that it's a real privilege to work with the people that we work with that support us. But also, Mr. Chair, I think to your leadership, thank you for leading us through a really smooth process. I think everybody, we got all kinds of input, people got heard, it's clear, and thank you for setting the context here, which I won't go over about how the budget fits into everything. I think we are facing a lot of difficult times coming forward. This board, I think, has turned, and the whole organization, to kind of a well-oiled machine. I found myself thinking maybe it was that refining fire of the 2020 budget that was 10 pages when we adopted it, that kind of got us all into really working together pretty smoothly and focusing on what's important and not spending too much time on things that we don't really need to spend a whole lot of time on. So thank you. I think we are going into future difficult times. I will recommend, I have not yet read the book, but I've now heard a couple of interviews and read things about Matthew Desmond's newest book on poverty by America. And I think these are the challenges that we're facing, we're trying to deal with. In all of these years of budgets, this one is really focusing, I think, more and more on equity. We're really actually doing the work, which is really exciting. It's not always as obvious as it might be, and that's actually probably a good thing because I think we're making it systemic, so you don't see it so much, which is a good thing. And I think that's all I want to say. Just thank you, Mr. Chair, for leading us through this. You're going out on a high note with this one. And thank you to all my colleagues and our staff. I also actually kind of really love the budget season, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. We'll move next to Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with Garvey. I learned to love the budget season. I should be dreading it, right? But because it is extremely labor intensive, but it has a very positive side. And the positive side is that we get to look really deep in our community's needs and desires. We really get to engage with everybody, and I agree with you, Mr. Chair. This was another year where, these two aphorisms are true. There is no such thing like a good budget year or an easy budget year. And the second one is that every line item has a constituency, and this is very important, and this played a very big role. And this is an additional reason for thanking you and commending you to an extraordinarily well-managed budget process. I think that the chair plays a very critical role here in collaboration with an amazing preparing and work of the Department of Management and Finance and everybody involved in the county manager's effort to present a robust budget. But I think that your chairmanship has really accomplished something that we all can be proud of, and this was really very, very well done. You said, Mr. Chair, that the budget is responsible, and I would add, it's also audited. We have really checks and balances. We have good insight mechanisms to understand, not only be careful about how we spend, where we spend, and the way we spend public money, doing that very responsibly and with a lot of possibilities to internally check on these processes and making it very transparent. I want to use this opportunity again to invite everybody to where it really, there is really a presentation online, a presentation of Argos, in real time, how Arlington's taxpayers' money is actually spent and implemented. But it's also our independent or county board's audit direction, its policy decisions, and over how we align and understand the problems in front of us in the best and most efficient way from the financial point of view. That said, this year, I would agree with everybody who is seeing that our biggest challenge by far is the growing economic inequality. There are Arlingtonians, and we have seen that in appropriations like the eviction prevention funding, like the pressure to invest even more in housing. That these differences, these discrepancies are really bothering me. They're not easier to address. They are becoming more difficult to address, and that will be a stressful for next budget, and I'm afraid for quite a while ahead of us. We have been responsive to the mental health crisis in many different levels in this budget. I was very happy to see that we support our Department of Economic Development. And specifically, I'm very happy to see that we have finally invested appropriate amounts of money to strengthen our partnerships, the Columbia Pike Partnership, the Langston Boulevard Partnership, and Clarendon Alliance. These are critical partners. When we want to say that we are putting the money in where our mouth is, when it comes to this, to support and continuous engagement with small businesses, with these amazing but struggling employers that we have all over in Arlington, but specifically in these three aforementioned corridors. I think that these are my very personal highlights. I'm very thankful to all of you who we worked well together to keep the additional climate coordinator position. This is another huge challenge that we will have to deliver in a way that it is a whole government response, exactly the same way we did it the equity front, which I think that we made significant progress, but a lot more needs to be done. And this budget has, again, be very responsive on this. I will close with saying, with thanking again DMF and the leadership of DMF and the County Manager's Office for doing an amazing work. I commend them and I congratulate them for the start of budget year, fiscal year 25. I am ready to support the remaining motions to complete the budget work for this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. Now move next to Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you alluded, our economic forecasts in the course of this budget have improved significantly. It's a little easier to talk about a great budget when over the last 3 months we have seen growth in our economic forecasts. We have a budget that will meet many of the pressing needs in our community, and I believe will do so in a fiscally smart way. On our economy and economic development, our commercial sector essentially stayed level in growth, a remarkable result given the ongoing vacancy rate of 22%. I think we're going to need to be vigilant because leases are 2, 5, and 10 years, so we may not have seen the bottom of this challenge, and there's much work to do. I want to echo the thanks really to colleagues and to the manager for the investment in Langston Boulevard Alliance and Clarendon Alliance and the Columbia Pike Partners. I acknowledge that this has been a long-standing thing that we've sought to work on. I think that we have a way of moving forward. I'm mindful that there will always be additional needs, but I really appreciate that we've taken this step. Narrowly on housing, the budget focuses on it, and I'm really pleased that it does so. There's a request for $150,000 in additional inspections of committed affordable units from our housing groups. We've done that. I believe that we have effectively reached the commitment for the equivalent of $18.7 million in AHIF. In the budget in the last week, for those not following, we have put over 4.5 million, could be 4.6 million in funding for AHIF, which is always a priority. I'm particularly pleased that we put 800,000 in ongoing funding. You mentioned eviction prevention. There's more to do, but we have been able to listen to our community and invest in affordable housing. On our collective bargaining, I'm thrilled, I mentioned it earlier, I do think for responsibility and posterity, just in case not everyone was watching on Tuesday, we did vote as a majority of the board, not all board members, we did vote to increase board members' salaries. And I think it's important to state it here because I don't think everybody was listening on Tuesday. It was $12,000 per board member. I continue to believe that it's the responsible thing to do so that more and more of our community can fiscally afford to serve in this role, which better serves our community as a whole, irrespective of your political views. On climate change, echo the thought, big thanks for the second climate position. There's much more to do to deliver transformational change, but this is a step in the right direction. On our schools and children, just to get specific, the 4 behavioral health professionals in our high schools, very glad that we prioritized that so that Arlington Public Schools will be able to invest there, and it's part of our budget, but it's a benefit that will accrue to our schools quite specifically, as well as our children and youth as a whole. There's also in the APS budget, I think we provided in that 39% sufficient funding for additional staff to address this mental health challenge and substance abuse, which are such pressing issues for us. I know we will remain committed to addressing the mental health crisis head on, and it's so clear that we must. Finally, on hunger, I'm appreciative of a small amount, but the mini grants I think are a step in the right direction. They're fiscally smart, they're focused. We also have invested. This is an area where need is particularly acute now because of the SNAP cliff that has come, and also we're seeing needs, frankly, at our providers that are greater than at sometimes during the pandemic. I want to end by complimenting the leadership of the county manager and deputy county manager, Ms. Cowan, as well. I think you are now accustomed to my late January, early February spike in concern with all the things that I want to address, but also to you, Mr. Chair, for leading a budget process that was effective and made investments which certainly align with my priorities and the priorities of that Arlington has been all about. So a very big thank you to you, Mr. Chair, as well as to colleagues as a whole. I think we were able to make investments that set us up for future growth. I'm happy to support the budget.
Terrific. We'll now conclude with Ms. Crystal.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Want to begin by echoing the thanks that others have provided, and particularly heartfeltedly articulated by you, Mr. Chair, to our budget team, to our county manager, to Ms. Cowan, to the entirety of the county manager's office, and the extraordinary group of DMF employees who work tirelessly, fueled only by passion for good budgeting practices and TANG. You all have been just extraordinary partners, and we appreciate it. I appreciate it immensely. I think my colleagues have actually done a fantastic job summarizing some of the priorities of the budget, and so I'm not going to belabor them. I want to talk about one kind of remaining point regarding this budget, then a couple of big themes, if you all will indulge me, as Chair Dorsey noted, in a little bit of reflection upon the completion of my 8th and final budget. First, though, just a note regarding housing. There was a lot of conversation. We certainly heard a lot of advocacy about AHIF. I feel that very personally, as I know my colleagues do as well. I wanted to note, in some ways, where it's interesting what we are adopting today is also paired with $9.6 million that we were not planning on, or that was sort of conceived of in the overall pool of developer contributions, but not in the near term with the Americana site plan that we just approved. And it is just a reminder that the general fund contributions to the AHIF are not the alpha and omega of the money that is available to support the development of affordable housing in our community. But the real plea I wanted to make is that we not forget about the Barcroft apartments. I think so much of the conversation that we have had about the AHIF and the amount of money in the AHIF just treats that $150 million investment as though it simply doesn't exist. And I think while the support of preservation of those many, many units for nearly a century of affordability, that by no means absolves us of the need for other action and aggressive action and continued contributions to the Affordable Housing AHIF, to the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. But I think it really, it does us a disservice to pretend that investment doesn't exist, both in terms of our measuring and monitoring towards our overall goals consistent with the Affordable Housing Investment, or the Affordable Housing Master Plan. But it also does a disservice to the attention that should be demanded of all of us to Barcroft, both that residents need and that the homes themselves need with regard to the ongoing quality and maintenance, to non-displacement, both in terms of the long-run commitments to non-displacement of tenants by the cost of affordability, but also making sure that renovations don't dislocate or displace anyone. We talked about that as a generational investment. It still is, and to sort of pretend that our Affordable Housing Investment Fund picture, is not colored or shaped by the $150 million loan and the significant multi-million-dollar debt service that we pay on that every year, it just, to me, is leaving out a really important part of the picture. Okay, so beyond that, again, echo my colleagues' thoughts on the environmental investments, certainly the mental health, which has been a really strong one, our public schools, and other areas of priority. I think colleagues have put that well. Two observations just in closing. One is this budget reflects a transition that is hard fought, difficult to do, and very much not yet settled, and that is the idea of equity as sharing power. And it does that in a couple of ways. The Stanford Center on Civil Society talks about this in really compelling terms, which is that we can spend time trying to tear down these walls to include more voices and viewpoints, which we've really sought to do. But only then does the hard work actually begin of trying to integrate those different viewpoints, and particularly with regard to defining what good means. Because the budget is really about this effort in how can we do the most good for the most people, and we are used to arguing in those terms. It gets really challenging when we start to, or are forced to, challenge the definition of what goods mean or good outcomes are. As the Stanford authors point out, we innately know what good means to us and from our perspective, but when we invite others to the table, it requires us to expand that definition, which makes budgeting in some ways harder. But I think this budget shows that we're making an effort to do that in two ways. The first, and I won't belabor this because I had a great opportunity, supported by colleagues' questions, to talk about it, but the notice of funding available transition to nonprofit funding is really about sharing power with this community and community leaders to help us define the needs. I have to say I regret a little bit that I won't have the opportunity to vote on nonprofit funding in that new system, but I hope that we've laid the seeds to truly share power with more diverse voices in our community in defining needs and how they should be met. And the other big piece of power sharing that is reflected here is collective bargaining. And speaking of things that have been enormously demanding in terms of time and energy on our Department of Management and Finance, our manager's office, our legal team, as well as employee leadership themselves, this is a huge amount of work. And as the manager, as the guidance that our chair included, indicates, it's only one step. But this is about transforming how we do the budget. We talk, for example, one of the things that's come up a lot when we talk about ownership housing is, live where you work grants, right? Or we sometimes talk about other benefits and how do our benefits reflect our values. Well, this is actually no longer just about what we think our community values are, or even what we hear from residents about the benefits that we should be expanding to our employees. It's about our employees' own priorities, right? So we now are no longer talking about benefits in terms of how do they align with what the board values. They are collectively bargained benefits along with salaries. This is so important because employees are 80% of our budget, and for the first time, we are treating them not as inputs or widgets, but as real partners in determining what the future of the county as reflected in our budget should look like. And that's immensely exciting. It is also messy and hard. And so I just want to thank everyone who's been involved in this, because I think this has set our budgeting on a path to the future that really, really embodies the value of equity that we all profess to care about. One final parting thought. one of the things that I have sort of brought up over the years that has perhaps stuck in my craw since our first budget is this ongoing challenge where we ask our departments to bring forward performance measures, and they are rarely performance measures realistically. Far too often they are inputs or at best outputs. I have at times been a nag about this, at times less of a nag. I know our departments are doing the best that they can, but I spent some time recently with our Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, and I think they really helped remind me why all of this matters, because they talked about the challenge of understanding the community's real goals when reviewing the budget document. And I think, to me, I've always maintained, right, we have a strategic plan, we have goals, we have the comp plan that is our North Star. But in that conversation with the FAC, it really helped me understand there is a chasm of measurement between our comp plan goals, carbon neutral community by 2050, produce and preserve enough affordable housing to meet the needs of the community, and the inputs and outputs that we see as those performance measures. And into that huge gap, this is what our budget measures should help fill. The budget should be a way for the whole of the community and for the board members to really say, how are we making progress from both the dollar spent to the outputs, to the outcomes, to the sort of midterm comp plan goals, and then to the goals themselves. So that's something that has not necessarily shifted in the budget during my tenure, and something that I hope we can keep working towards. This is a community, I think, that holds its government accountable. This is a government that really seeks to hold itself accountable. And I think there are some really exciting ways that we can think about how our budget could better speak to our comp plan goals, so that we truly are using the budget as a tool of priority setting and reflection. So that is perhaps a challenge with which I will leave others. In the main, though, I mean, again, just so appreciative of the work being done at our staff level, including at the departmental level, to pull together a strong budget that reflects back to the community and gives us, as the board, an opportunity to take in the community's input, to try to guide this county for the next budget year and thereafter towards our collaborative goals. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your leadership, and colleagues for your great comments with which I associate myself.
Thank you, colleagues, one and all. So with that, we're now ready to proceed with items D through R of item number 34, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Crystal for the first tranche.
Fantastic. I am going to move all together a series of motions regarding the tax rates for our business improvement districts. I just closed out my window. Please forgive me. Oh no, I thought I had this handy. I just need one moment. Have you got it? Thank you. I think I tried to shut down another window and shut that one down instead. Thank you so much. I want to make sure that I get these right. Thank you, Mr. DeFerranti. So first, a motion regarding the Ballston Business Improvement Service District tax rate. I move that we adopt the calendar year of 2023 for the Ballston bid of 4.5 cents per $100 using the resolution attached to the staff report, attachment 1. For the National Landing Business Improvement Service District, I move that we adopt the proposed calendar year 2023 tax rate for the National Landing bid at the rate of 4.3 cents per $100 of assessed values in addition to the current real estate, again using the resolution attached as attachment 1. And finally, for the Roslyn Business Improvement District, I move that we adopt the calendar year 2023 tax rate of the Roslyn bid of 7.8 cents per $100 of assessed value in addition to the current real estate, again as outlined in the staff report attachment 1.
Okay, would you like to speak to that?
We had a great opportunity as part of our briefing with the Arlington Economic Development team to hear from our bids about the work that they are doing, and I appreciate the contributions made by our major property owners, commercial property owners within those districts to reinvest in them and help them become and continue to be great places to work and live.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Karantonis? We don't have you on the screen, so I'm going to audibly ask if you have any comments. You can feel free to just say no.
I don't.
Okay, thank you. We're now ready to move to a vote on items moved by Ms. Crystal. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you, Ms. Crystal. We'll now move to Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move in a block items G, H, I, and J. G is I move that we adopt the amendment to Chapter 26, Article 1 of the Arlington County Code, which is the Utilities Ordinance, Attachment Attachment 1, of this staff report, to increase the water and sewer rates effectively July 1st, 2023. In addition, I move H, which is to adopt the proposed amendment to Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-8A of the Arlington County Code, Attachment 1 of the staff report. This concerns the annual household solid waste rate. I also move I, which concerns the stormwater utility and the stormwater credit program. Adopt the resolution attached to the staff report concerning the creation of a stormwater utility and stormwater utility credit program effective January 1, 2024. I also move J, which is that we adopt an administrative change for a new fee for topsoil in the amount of $40 per cubic yard.
Thank you. Second. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to it at all, Mr. DeFerranti?
Sure. I'll briefly just try to cover these. The first G concerns our water and sewer rates. There's a need for slight additional investment so that we can cover the costs involved. So that's why I moved G. With respect to H, this is a big item that the manager and frankly we've tried to highlight so that we do not surprise our residents. There's been an increase from $307.89 to $406.14 for solid waste. This is because we had an excellent contract, which is in its, I believe, penultimate year, and we now need to, the market requires a significantly additional investment there in order for us to receive this, I think we would all say, essential service. The stormwater utility and stormwater credit program, we did receive one letter in this broad area in advance of this meeting. We've had a lot of discussion, but this is also going to be something that our residents need to continue to be informed about and educated on and engaged with on. But moving in the direction of the stormwater utility is necessary for that resolution. And then last is a new fee, at least as far as I was able to discern in the staff report, and it's for topsoil in the amount of $40 per cubic yard. I am one who believes that this is a sensible fee, and that if you want this in the private sector, if you purchase this, that's a significant cost, and we should not be we should be doing this fee to recover costs in this area. I think I've covered it, and if the manager or the chair will let me know if I've said anything inaccurate.
I think you're good. All right. Any further discussion on this item? Now move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it 5-0. Thank you very much. Mr. Karantonis, you're up next.
With some fee increases, but they're all modest and mostly to make up for inflation. So this is item K, which the motion is to adopt amendments to Chapter 26, Utilities, Article 1, Section 26-11 and Section 26-12 of the Arlington County Code, Utilities Ordinance, attachment 1 to this item, to increase the infrastructure availability fees and meter installation charges effective July 1st, 2023. I will then follow with item L. These are two county manager's recommendations that I will be moving. Number one, adopt an inflationary increase of 5.2% to the Department of Environmental Services development-related fees as depicted on the DES, Department of Environmental Services Permit and Place Chapter 22, Street Development and Construction, Section 22-7, Chapter 57, Erosion and Sediment Control, Section 57-8, and Chapter 61, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance, Section 61-4 of the County Code of Arlington County, Virginia, related to charges for the review and approval of engineering plans, building permits, right-of-way use permit fees, and other related permitting, construction, and inspection services as shown in Attachment A, to to this item 34L, effective July 1st, 23. And secondly, I move to adopt an ordinance as shown in attachment B to amend, reenact, and recodify chapter subdivision section 23-11, subsection A of the County Code of Arlington County, Virginia, to move the fees relating to plat review and public improvement, public bond administration fees to the DES permit, plan review, subdivision plan, plat review, and bond administration fee schedule, and increase the fees by an inflationary factor of 5.2%, as shown in attachment A, effective July 1st, 2023. And I'm going to, we want to vote, Mr. Chair? I didn't hear you correctly.
No, continue with your M and N.
Exactly. So item M, the motion is to adopt the inflationary increase of 5.2%, which is an increase to the indirect cost surcharge associated with inspection service fees of 6%, the establishment of an indirect cost surcharge associated with zoning fees of 21%, and technical corrections associated with plumbing fees and a fee exemption set forth in development-related fee schedules of the Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development, as shown in the attachments A and B to this item 34M, effective July 1st, 34N is the motion is to adopt the fiscal year 2024 Department of Parks and Recreation fee resolution attachment 1 to this item 34N. So to all this, these are different fees. As I said before, these are relatively moderate increases or increases that are linked to an inflationary indicator, for the most part 5.2%, or like in the case of the last item, the Department of Parks and Recreation. These are fees that are catching up with the idea of a cost recovery of programs that the department is offering. I don't think that I would like to make more, provide more explanations for those who are interested. They can actually visit the agenda of today's meeting. The fee schedules are all listed, and there is a clear listing of the previous and the adjusted fees. This is really, the meat and potatoes of administrative fees. They go to different funds, so utilities fund, and so forth. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I read through.
Thank you. So Mr. Karantonis has moved the county manager's recommendations for items 34K, L, M, and N. Ms. Crystal, I heard you earlier with a second.
I still intended.
Okay, all right, seconded by Ms. Crystal. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And hearing none opposed, the ayes have it, and K through N are adopted. And Ms. Garvey, will you close us out?
I will try to and be efficient about it. So I am also moving the manager's recommendation for item O. I move that we adopt the proposed amendments to Chapter 66 of the Code of Arlington County, Virginia, related to modifying the technology zone qualifications as described in the board report of April 12. For item P, I move that we adopt the proposed fiscal year 2024 pay plan as set forth in attachments 1 to 6 of the April 18 staff report. For item Q, I move that we adopt the fire department's special events fee schedule as set forth in the board report of April 22nd. And for item R, I move that we adopt increases to the police department fees related to off-duty details, including but not limited to special events effective July 1, 2023, and reflected in the resolution attached to the staff report of April 3rd, 2023.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. DeFerranti.
Second.
Any further speaking to it, Ms. Garvey?
Just a little bit. On the first one, to modify the technology zone qualifications, these amendments are just modernizing Chapter 66 ordinance language to align with current business processes and trends in the tech industry. They're minor technical changes, and they're not expansive. They also actually include some updated language from the Commissioner of the Revenue, and we've done things like change Jefferson Davis Corridor to the proper Richmond Highway name. So that's what that is. The one on P, which is the pay plan, each year as part of the budget process, we do adopt an updated pay plan. This one includes adjustments made as part of the compensation maintenance plan and our decisions. I could read everything. I think maybe people don't need to hear it all. It does include the increase in board salaries that Mr. DeFranti mentioned earlier, so I won't go into those. The special events fees, item Q, that is actually a new one. In the past, the fire department's not publicly published special events fees, but moving forward, we will publish the fire department special event fees to ensure transparency for our public. It's kind of interesting, we host a lot of special events, which people are sort of aware of, and they include festivals, bike races, running races, marathons, parades, and pub crawls, and we provide all kinds of emergency services for people to keep everyone safe. And then item R, the last one, this is a motion, this includes an increase in the off-duty hourly rate for sworn police officers from $60 to $75 an hour per officer. There's also an increase in administrative and vehicle fees, and it's all to achieve cost recovery, which the current fees set way back in 2013 have not kept up with, and we're also more fairly allocating costs. So that's a quick summary.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion on those items? Mr. Karantonis, any further discussion? Hearing none.
No.
Move
Thank
to
you,
a
Mr.
vote.
Chair.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, the ayes have it, 5-0, and that concludes our consideration of item number 34. Ms. Jacobs, are there any other items that need to come before the board today?
There are none.
Thank you so much. And with that, thank you, everyone. And the board is in recess until Tuesday, April 25th, where we will convene at 3:00 p.m. Enjoy your weekend.
And we have a budget.
Hey, we do.
Thank you.